Hey, everybody. The fact that I'm talking first as Jeremy Finestone might tell you that this is a little bit different episode of Speaking of Strong Style. What we've done here for the Thanksgiving holiday is packaged together a series of segments by Stephen Conway, who's here with me today, about Hiroshi Tanahashi, his entire career. And so I'm going to hand it off to him right now to tell you all about it before we wish you a happy Thanksgiving and give you to the rest of the episode.
Well, thank you, Jeremy. And I really want to say happy Thanksgiving to everybody here in America and to all those who listen to us around the world. We are missing you this week, and we will be back next week live in our usual time to go over World Tag League and such. But yes, over the last few months, I've put together just in little 10, 15-minute blurbs at the end of the show, a little outline of the history of Hiroshi Tanahashi. And I know that there have been times when I've managed to squeeze some things in and I've had to skip over other things. But overall, I think that I put together something that really gives you a perspective on where he was in his career at various points in time in New Japan's history and how he was an integral part of not just the things that he was involved in. There was a cascading effect with Tanahashi. He goes through the history of Chaos, GBH, through the history of course, the formation of Hantai, but a lot of other groups as well. LIJ, he was an integral part of all of those things. So I hope you enjoy this. It goes all the way through his close call, where he had a collapsed lung from being stabbed by his girlfriend. Yes. And from going from the gossip pages to the cover of Tokyo Sports and being the ace that we know and love today. So with that in mind, we will be back next week. But I hope you enjoyed today's broadcast where we cobbled together my history of the ace of the universe, Hiroshi Tanahashi.
You know, I know that Naito and Tanahashi were finishing up their careers. They're at the tail end when you decided to do this retrospective after the G1 this past year. But neither of us expected him to announce a retirement right when you were finishing up his career retrospective. So it's all kind of dovetailed together, and I'm really glad that we're able to compile this best of for all of our listeners to enjoy this. So this is our little intro. Steven got to talk about it, give him his credit, because this is all him, all the work that he did on this. And I just wanted to make sure it was put together in a package that the rest of the world could enjoy. So enjoy this. Enjoy your Thanksgiving. Steven, happy Thanksgiving to you. And we're going to take it away.
So are we ready for some history?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
So I was looking back at this because right now we're in this angle here with Tanahashi and evil over the presidency. And now the guy is, of course, well known that he is one of the greatest in New Japan history, one of the better in Japanese history. That's a pretty hard list to get on. But Hiroshi Tanahashi's done it. And I thought we would just kind of look back at his career a little bit and see how he got there. And it's a pretty interesting road. So let's talk a little bit about the history of Hiroshi Tanahashi. This will be a multiple part thing because the dude's career is extensive. But Hiroshi Tanahashi was born in Ogaki, which is in Gifu. It's about 240 miles west of Tokyo. It's close to Nagoya, actually. The closest big city from that town is Nagoya. And he played baseball in high school and didn't find wrestling until he was in college. Now, where he attended college is interesting. Hiroshi Tanahashi went to Ritsumeikan University in Kyoto. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Ritsumeikan University. This is one of Japan's most prestigious private universities. Now, this is big time stuff, Jeremy. This is not a place that allows dummies in. And it is well known for its social science and international relations program, as well as science and engineering being it's particularly acclaimed in those areas. And this is a tough school to get into, but Tanahashi did and graduated. He is listed as a notable alumnus on the Wikipedia page for the school, along with some interesting people here, Jeremy. Some other graduates of the same college. Princess Raya of Jordan. Well, you got some royalty in there. Many politicians, CEOs, artists, and this guy, Momofuku Ando. Momofuku Ando. Now, the reason I bring him up, he founded Nissin Foods. He invented instant noodles and cup noodle. Dude invented all that. Now I'm asking you this. Now, what would anybody in America's 20s be like if not for that guy? How many instant noodles did we all eat? Like the ramen noodle packs and all that kind of
Game
stuff? And
changer.
the
Definitely
cup
game
noodles?
changer.
Guy invented cup noodles. My God, that changed everything. So I thought that was interesting. That's
He has
another alumnus.
MSG'd the shit out of all of us.
Yeah, well, that's very true. He's why we all can't make complete fists with our full fist with our hands sometimes. But you have that much salt in you. But while wrestling in college, he was actually scouted by New Japan and invited to try out. So a little bit of a different path where people try to bust down New Japan's door, so to speak, the way Sonata famously did, and Naito, and all these guys. And instead, it was Tanahashi who was basically recruited. But he completed his degree and then joined up. His tryout was in February of 1998, but he actually graduated from college in 1999, and then he joined the dojo. And I keep thinking about, here's a guy who graduated from one of the most prestigious colleges in all of Japan, and then he goes and joins New Japan Pro Wrestling. His parents had to have been thrilled. Can you imagine the smiles on their faces as he tells them, what are you going to do with your degree from one of the most prestigious schools in the whole country? I'm joining the circus, Ma. So, a bit of a rebellious streak, perhaps, from Tanahashi right there. So, he trained at New Japan. He made his debut on October 10th, 1999, and in Korakuen Hall. And it was an interesting night. I'm going to go over it here. He lost to Shinya Makabe. So that's Togi Makabe before he was Togi, in only 6 minutes and 55 seconds. Same day, Katsuyori Shibata had his very first singles match, losing to Wataru Inoue. Now, Shibata had done a junior heavyweight battle royal over the course of the summer, but other than that, this was his very first match. So Shibata, Tanahashi, and Inoue very, very new as well. All of them were kind of that batch of young lions, and Makabe was still very early in his journey too. So that card, what I just mentioned there, where those two made their debuts, was the night before a Tokyo Dome show. So they were at Korakuen Hall, and it was called like the Tokyo Dome Eve show. And that show drew a listed crowd of 58,500 the next night. Naoya Ogawa defeated Shinya Hashimoto in the main event to keep the NWA World Heavyweight title. The IWGP title was second from the top on that one. Keiji Muto beat Manabu Nakanishi to retain that belt. And Tanahashi wasn't on that card. They had debuted the night before there at Korakuen Hall. So he got his first victory on October 19th. So 9 days later in Fukuoka, beating Wataru Inoue. So I mentioned Inoue, Shibata, Tanahashi all got started around the same time. These guys would go on to wrestle each other a lot. So that was the batch of young lions that you would see opening up all these shows. Back then, they did fewer tags. You know how sometimes you'll get Ishii and Murashima versus somebody in Kato and all that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
This was mostly these three guys wrestling each other for a really long time. But his first win, to give you an idea how hot New Japan was at the time, I mentioned 58,500 in the Tokyo Dome. His first win was only a few days later in a house show in Fukuoka that drew 4,500. So 4,500 at a house show. I think if they went to Fukuoka and did, a couple thousand, 3,000 right now, we would consider it a pretty healthy crowd. 4,500 for a house show back then. New Japan was in very good shape in 1999. Wouldn't be for much longer, but at that point it was. His 1999 win-loss record was 9-22. So you get the idea. He would beat the other young lions, but he would lose to a lot of them as well. Makabe in particular was kind of a class ahead, a little bit of time ahead of these guys. So a lot of losses to Makabe in there. And he fell to any main...
You didn't have 2024 win-loss record, did you?
No, I didn't. We'll get to all that. But it fell to any main roster guys he encountered right there. It was mostly young lion matches. And Venkin mentions here, it sounds like the golden days of the company. It really was. In the mid-90s, it was even bigger. Like they were doing quarterly Tokyo Dome shows back then. Quarterly. And packing in far more because now they have that enormous stage so that 45,000 is about the most they can get in there because it blocks off all the seats in the outfield, basically, of the Tokyo Dome. Back then, they just had a ramp going to the ring, and they could sell all those seats. So these, but yes, it was a really good time, the mid and late 90s for New Japan. multiple Tokyo Dome shows a year, doing great. So they had very few tag matches, like I mentioned, very few encounters with main roster guys, and he went 9-22. Now, they did have a Young Lion Cup in the year 2000. Tanahashi was in it, along with Makabe, Kenzo Suzuki, who is now Kenso in All Japan, but Kenzo Suzuki was in there, Shibata, Wataru Inoue, like I mentioned again, and Masakazu Fukuda. Now, those were the participants. So, 2000 Young Lion Cup. On night one, Shibata hit Fukuda with a flying elbow. Fukuda ended up collapsing on the mat and was taken to the hospital, and he died 5 days later from an internal brain hemorrhage. So on night one of the tournament, he was taken in, and then a few days later passed away from that. So that had a pretty dark pall over that entire Young Lion Cup.
Yeah.
Makabe ended up going undefeated in the round robin. They devoted the rest of the tournament to Fukuda and the loss of Fukuda. It was all dedicated to him.
Right.
But Makabe went undefeated in the round robin, lost to Kenzo Suzuki in the final, and Tanahashi actually finished 4th out of 6. And of course, Fukuda's matches were all ended up as forfeits, really. So Tana only won one match in the ring, and it was against Inoue. So he was not being promoted as the next big thing at all at this stage. He was kind of back in the pack of this group of young lions, and Makabe was kind of the star of the bunch. In the summer, he began meeting more main roster wrestlers like El Samurai, Negro Casas. He got a win over Negro Casas. That would have been his biggest career win to date. So Negro Casas, of course, big star in CMLL or EMLL, I think it was still then. But during the G1 that year, Tanahashi was in prelim tags with the other young lions sometimes, but also sometimes with Shinjiro Otani and Koji Kanemoto. So then he got hurt, so he was out for a little while. He returned on April 19th of 2001, and he was back again, mostly as a young lion, pretty much in the same place that he had been for the year before. He did get an interesting win over Scott Hall in Chiba on September of that year. So that was just a little bit after WCW went under. Scott Hall was back in New Japan, and Tanahashi got a win over him. Began seeing some more main roster guys, but in 2001, he was still 25-62. So now we're 2 years into the career, and he's about in the same place he was when he got there. Like, things are not taking off like a rocket. People are not thinking that this is the next main event guy. This is not the future ace. Like, the very few people are saying that Tanahashi's the future ace. Now he had some handicaps here. He had to wrestle guys like Giant Silva and Giant Singh. I don't know if you remember those guys, but that couldn't have been easy. But he was also in there with Tenkozy sometimes, Nagata, Kensuke Sasaki. So the one thing you can say about his second year is they started to trust him to put over more important guys. And so it wasn't just the young lions. They're still losing a lot, but he was starting to work with some of the higher guys on the card.
Got it.
He and Kenzo Suzuki formed a tag team, and they were called the Kings of the Hill. They weren't, but at least it was something, right? And so now they entered the 2001 G1 Tag League. That's what the World Tag League was called then, G1 Tag League. It was his first major tournament. It was with Kenzo Suzuki there, and they finished last on 4 points, but they were basically the young lions in the group. And their 2 wins were over Jushin Liger and Osamu Nishimura. That's a good team. And Scott Norton and Super J. Now, Scott Norton was a big star in New Japan. Super J was Jeff Farmer, also known as the NWO Sting. It's the fake Sting. So New Japan was getting a lot of leftovers after WCW went under a little bit. To give you an idea, here's who won that tournament. Kojima and Tenzan finished second. Nakanishi and Nagata finished third. Norton and Super J were down there. The winners of the tournament, Jeremy, Mike Barton and Jungle Jim Steele.
Oh,
if you remember Jungle Jim Steele from WCW, Jungle Jim and Mike Barton was Bart Gunn from the Guns, like with Bart and Billy Gunn. And that was who won the G1 Tag League that year. Woof.
Must have been a hawk fight.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, and in your USVA guy does. I mean, NWO Sting actually did get over in Japan. He did. That is a fair point. He was far more over in Japan than he ever was at being the fake Sting, the NWO Sting. But that's about as difficult a gimmick as you could get, right? But from there, he and Suzuki remained a consistent tag team, and the Young Lion opening match days were over after that. So they did finish dead last in that tournament, but after that, they were the Kings of the Hill. They were a real tag team. And their win-loss record stayed mostly on the losing side, but not as severely. Right. So after that, he was 45, 60, and 6. So closer than other. He was starting to win almost as much as he lost. He did wrestle at Wrestling World 2002. That was the January 4th show that year. What it was called, Wrestling World. It wasn't called Wrestle Kingdom yet. And he and Suzuki teamed up, and they lost to Kazunari Murakami and Yuki Ishikawa. And that show drew 51,500. So, he got a big, and that was not the opening match of the show, by the way. It was about third or something like that. So, got a little experience in front of the big Tokyo Dome crowd. Main event, by the way, was Jun Akiyama defending the Noah GHC title against Yuji Nagata.
Capsule.
Yeah, no kidding. And then Tenkozy beat Shono and Giant Singh in the semifinal of that one. That was the semifinal. And in 2002, he entered his first G1 climax. He finished 4th out of 6 in the A block on 4 points. Yoshihiro Takayama won it with 8 points, and Masachono won the B block with 7 points. And Tanahashi's wins were over Shiro Koshinaka and Kensuke Sasaki. Chono ended up winning that tournament, by the way, but that was his very first one. So again, not exactly launched to the moon here, right? So that was his 2002 G1, struggling through things. He's mostly working the first half of the card. He's on mostly before intermission with a few exceptions. Mm-hmm. Now, that was in September of that year. On December 5th, 2002, I'm going to read you an item from the New York Times. By Thomas Crampton, the International Herald Tribune, December 5th, 2002, the whirlwind romance of New Japan Pro Wrestling heartthrob Hiroshi Tanahashi and his TV star girlfriend, Hitomi Hara, ended with stab wounds last week. The police in Tokyo took Hara into custody on charges of attempted murder for allegedly stabbing the muscle-bound fighter twice in the back when he attempted to end their relationship. Tanahashi, who suffered slight wounds, met Hara in October when he appeared as the first special guest on her show, Strong Style. So now they say slight wounds in this article here from the International Herald Tribune. He suffered a collapsed lung. I mean, this is not necessarily a small wound. He was stabbed twice in the back when he told her that he was seeing somebody else and he wanted to end their relationship. And she tried to kill him, basically. But he missed the Tokyo Dome show from there. That was in December. He wasn't able to come back for the Tokyo Dome show. He was in Chono and Nakanishi's corner for their match. And as things went on, I wanted to bring this up, as he did come back in February of 2003. But that case, she wove its way through the Japanese legal system. And on June 11th, 2003, we got this UPI report. And Benkin says that's what the Gabe Kidd promo was about. Yeah, he brought that up times there. But a Tokyo court on Wednesday ordered probation for a former TV star who stabbed her pro wrestler boyfriend after he began dating another woman. A Tokyo district court judge sentenced former television star Hitomi Hara to 3 years in prison, but placed her on probation for 4 years. She got 4 years probation, as it turns out. Hara was charged with attempted murder after confessing she tried to kill her boyfriend, then planned to commit suicide. That was apparently the plan in the moment. Hara stabbed wrestler Hiroshi Tanahashi in his back at her Tokyo apartment last year when he told her he was dating another woman. The Mainichi Shimbun news agency quoted the judge as saying, quote, "She committed the crime only after becoming emotional," unquote. So there you go. That's why she got 4 years of probation for trying to kill the ace. He was out of action until February 2003, like I mentioned. So that was in December, missed a couple of months. But the publicity made him a much bigger star than before. And oddly, the crowd started responding to him much bigger after he came back. And his return was the main event of a show that drew really well. So his talent was beginning to shine through, of course. People were beginning to see that this guy was a good wrestler. But now he had all this goodwill. It's like, oh my God, we almost lost this guy. This guy's growing. We almost didn't have Hiroshi Tanahashi anymore. 2003 would end up being a much, much bigger year than Hiroshi Tanahashi had previously. Since 99 through most of 2002, he was just kind of hanging around there for a little bit. His first 3 years were relatively unremarkable. That wasn't going to be the case for a whole lot longer. So when we pick this up again, we'll have Hiroshi Tanahashi coming back from almost being killed by his girlfriend at the time and returning to the ring and trying to recapture the magic, or maybe even find new magic with the fans of New Japan. And that's where we'll leave off for this time.
You've got some experiences about Tanahashi you want to tell us about.
Well, when we last left off with Hiroshi Tanahashi last week, we mentioned that he was just recovering from being stabbed by his girlfriend, went through that whole controversy. Now, before all that had happened, he had spent most of the first 3 years of his career doing fine. Not lighting the world on fire, long time as a young lion, didn't really go on excursion. Important thing to note. So he was just always there in with New Japan, and he had worked his way up a little bit. He was in a tag team that was working with Kenzo Suzuki, starting to work his way up. Then had the whole thing with his girlfriend where he had the incident where he was stabbed and missed a few months. He had a collapsed lung, and anyway missed the January 4th show, which was still a thing. One called Wrestle Kingdom, but it was still a thing in 2003. Thing is, again, him almost being killed by his girlfriend ended up in a weird way working in his favor, because the fans, first of all and foremost, the talent was starting to show through. People started to see, okay, this guy can wrestle. Well, what it did was it almost made him realize that, like, geez, we almost lost this guy. And it wasn't pity that made them react to him, but it was just like, oh, geez, we didn't almost have Tanahashi for a while. We're glad he's here. So when he came back in the opening night of the opening event of a card, but he was in there against Manabu Nakanishi, who was a very real star. He lost, but that was in February 16th of 2003. But it was treated as a special match, labeled a Tanahashi return match. And it was in Sumo Hall in front of 10,000 fans. So right where Larry just was right there. I thought this was interesting too. Second match on that card, by the way, Jeremy, was Makabe beating Toru Yano, very young Toru Yano, in under 4 minutes. So just a quick night. So quick Yano match, go figure, right? But back then it was just because he was doing jobs at the moment for Makabe. His tag team with Suzuki was gone. Kenzo, that was over with already, but they had different plans for Tanahashi. He rejoined the crew full-time in March for the Hyper Battle series. Hyper Battle was the series it was called. And New Japan decided to create an under 30 championship. So this is for young wrestlers. So an under 30 title. To establish it, they held a G2 tournament. So we have the G1 tournament. Now we have the G2 tournament, which is for the younger guys.
Already sounds secondary.
Well, but it is. But it's an under 30 title, right? So the whole idea is, yes, it's a secondary belt. Makabe was in the tournament, and so was Yutaka Yoshi, who was another one of the guys that they were grooming for future stardom. Tanahashi beat Yoshi in the semifinals and then beat Makabe, who had been an antagonist to his ever since his career began. His first match was a loss to Makabe, but he defeated Makabe in the finals April 23 in Hiroshima and captured the under 30 title. So for the first time, Tanahashi was a champion within New Japan. He proceeded to hold that title for nearly 2 years, about 20 months he had it. He had 12 defenses in those 20 months or so not a ton of defenses, but it was a start. His first championship in Japan. 2003 would end up being a very eventful year for him. In May, he faced Hiroshi Tenzan in the Dome for Ultimate Crush. Ultimate Crush was one of the frequent Dome events they had back then. And he wrestled Hiroshi Tenzan in a match to determine a new number 1 contender for the IWGP title. So we're moving up pretty quickly. I mean, this is a guy who was not on after intermission very often before all this. And this was before intermission too. It was the opening match, but it was the opening match of a Dome show. And that show drew 55,000 people. It featured a lot of MMA matches too. So I'm bringing this up for a reason. It drew well, 55,000, no question about it. Josh Barnett was on the show. Lyoto Machida, if you remember him from UFC. Ken Shamrock, of course, the legend from early days of UFC and, of course, later in WWE and all that. It drew very well, but things were beginning to show signs of going wrong. What I mean by that is this show that was a mix of pro wrestling matches and MMA fights were starting to wear down the crowd a little bit. Yeah, Kenta Kobashi defeated Masachono in a GHC title match on this one. So they were bringing over Noah guys. Toshihiro Takayama, who was a K1 guy and a Pride fighting guy. I think more Pride actually than K1. But he and Yuji Nagata had an NWF title. That's Antonio Inoki's old belt versus IWGP title match. Takayama won and took both titles. But what you had was this mix of, okay, here's the real fights and here are the fake ones, right? And within its own context, a pro wrestling show is presented as if these are real battles, of course, right? And when it's not thrown in your face that it isn't, you can play along. And pro wrestling show within its own structure, you can kind of get into it. It's a challenge, though, Jeremy, when you're sitting there watching real fights under Vale Tudo rules. And of course, pro wrestling doesn't look anything like that, right? You know, so you're watching something that's real, and then you're seeing something that starts to look pretty fake next to it. There's a reason these things are kept separate. And so they had all these real fights in there as MMA was taking off, and it was certainly taking off in Japan, wildly popular, Pride, K1, all these other companies. And Inoki, who was still very much an influence in New Japan, felt that that was the direction they needed to go. I mean, he always worked ideas of MMA in there, and Inoki always presented himself as a real quote-unquote fighter. But a pro wrestling show with MMA on it and things just looks awkward. And while this one drew well, 55,000, you would start to see the attendance numbers at the Dome show starting to drop after this. This was the kind of the beginning of dark days ahead, but he was on that show as in a number one contenders match. Now, Tanahashi and Yukata Yoshi then became a regular team. This was going to become important to Tanahashi as well. On June 13th of that year, he and Yoshi defeated Chono and Tenzan and captured the IWGP tag team titles. And that was in front of 8,500 people. So now he's the under 30 champion. Now he's teaming with Yoshi. They put him over Chono and Tenzan, who are some of the bigger stars of that era. And he's the IWGP tag team champion now. He goes into the G1 tournament that year as one half of the tag team champions. But he finished dead last in the A block. 4 points. Jun Akiyama from Noah won the block, by the way, and Tenzan finished second in the A block, but ultimately won the tournament, beating Akiyama in the finals. You know, they had the semifinalists and finalists and things. So, meaning if you finished second in your block, you also advanced. But and Tenzan came back and got his win back over the Noah guy there in the finals. So not an auspicious G1 in 2003, but he's in there, and it's the second one in a row. So at this point, he's the under 30 champion, half the tag team champions. Shinsuke Nakamura is starting to come around too. And so he and Yoshi entered the G1 Tag League as the tag team champions. And this was a little weird thing, Jeremy. They had their tournament block match against Mike Barton, who you remember was Bart Gunn, and Jim Steele. It was Jungle Jim Steele from WCW. That was an IWGP tag team title match and their block match. But their other block matches weren't IWGP tag team title matches. I don't know why. But they decided that the Barton and Steele match was actually a tag team title match. And they wiped out the 30-minute time limit for it. And it went over a half an hour. That match did. And Yoshi and Tanahashi ended up retaining. So they did not, I don't know why either. They didn't defend, or they didn't win the G1 Tag League. They finished fourth in the tournament, as a matter of fact, but they came out of it with the championship and having defended the belts once. Go figure. But they were kept fairly strong. Tanahashi was starting to really gain momentum here as a tag team wrestler because he and Yuji Nagata went to Noah on November 3rd in Hokkaido and defeated Kenta Kobashi and Tamon Honda to win the GHC tag team titles. So as we get to very early December of 2003, he's the under 30 champion, he's the IWGP tag champion, and he's the GHC tag team champion with a different partner. So lots going on for Tanahashi now. The days of coming on first or second are over with. December of that year, he defeated Naomichi Marufuji from Noah to defend that under 30 title, but he and Yoshi did not quite make it back to the Dome. They dropped the tag team titles December 14th to Tenzan and Osamu Nishimura. So in 2004, began with him defending his title against his tag team partner Yoshi, and that was about halfway up the January 4th Tokyo Dome card. But Shinsuke Nakamura had passed him by and main evented that year, beating Takayama to win the NWF and IWGP titles. So good news and bad news here. No longer first, and certainly better than being out with a collapsed lung. But your contemporary, your rival, Shinsuke Nakamura, just main evented the Dome. So that had to eat at him a little bit. He's not quite at that level yet, but still being thought of, right? January 10th, they dropped the GHC titles to Mitsuharu Masawa and Yoshinari Ogawa. So we did get a little crossover between two of the all-time greats right there. We were Masawa and Tanahashi shared a ring and a tag team title switch. So Nakamura ended up getting injured, by the way. This is going to be important to show where Tanahashi is on the ladder. He had to vacate the IWGP title. So in February, they had a match. They had a tournament, a small tournament to determine a new champion. Tanahashi defeated the former champion Takayama. That's the guy that lost it to Nakamura. So he's defeating a former IWGP and NWF champion in the first round, lost in the semifinals to Genichiro Tenryu, who's one of the all-time legends. Mm-hmm. So again, not too bad. Tenryu was a little bit older, but Tenzan ended up winning the tournament, but now he's starting to sniff around the IWGP title. He's beating former champions. More on the progression. Now, there was chaos with the IWGP title in 2004. Bob Sapp ended up winning the IWGP title. Then he lost a K1 match, a real fight, to Kazuyuki Fujita. Why do we care about this? Well, because Sapp had to vacate the IWGP title. They had a match to determine a new champion, and it was Fujita, the K1 guy who defeated Bob Sapp, against Tanahashi. So it was K1 versus New Japan, and they chose Tanahashi to represent New Japan in that match, which Fujita won. So once again, he's getting within very close sniffing distance to that IWGP title. And to get you an idea how crazy the title was that year, you know how often we see IWGP world title changes? Very rarely, right? In 2004, the title was vacated twice and had 6 changes in those 12 months. So the IWGP title was bouncing around all over the place. He entered the 2004 G1. And this saw Tanahashi break through again. This time he wins Block B with 12 points. He went 6-1 in the tournament. His only loss was in block play to Tenzan. Then he defeated Tenryu in the semifinals, so he got his win back against Tenryu. Remember, he faced Tenryu in the finals of the tournament to determine a new champion earlier this year. Got that win back, but then he lost to Tenzan in the finals of the G1. So Tenzan won another G1 there. And we're getting into more familiar territory. His partners are people like Yuji Nagata. I mentioned Yukata Yoshi. Hiroki Goto shows up as his partner, who is relatively new to New Japan. He would be facing eventual rivals like Nakamura, Toru Yano, Chono, and Katsuyori Shibata. He even teamed for a tournament with Taiji Ishimori back then. Ishimori coming over from Noah at the time. He got another IWGP title shot against Kensuke Sasaki in November, but didn't win it. Then he and Nakamura began teaming together. So they defeated, this is an interesting match here, Jeremy, Shinsuke Nakamura and Hiroshi Tanahashi defeated Minoru Suzuki and Kensuke Sasaki to win the IWGP tag team titles on December 11th in Osaka. So now he's a 2-time IWGP tag team champion, still has the under 30 title, and he's teaming with Shinsuke Nakamura. In both storyline and behind the scenes, not the best of friends. Nakamura and Tanahashi, it was always professional. There was never anything like, fights breaking out or anything like that. But they rubbed each other the wrong way. And you can read it in the book, of Nakamura's book. It's like these two just are different people. They're just different people. And so they used that tension. And while they were the tag team champions, And while they were partners, at the January 5th Tokyo Dome show, January 4th, 2005, they main evented the Dome show, Nakamura versus Tanahashi. And so it was the tag team champions wrestling each other. They were on top for the under 30 title, since they both were. And Nakamura defeated Tanahashi for the under 30 title that night. So they were still the tag team champions. And Nakamura was still half a step ahead of Tanahashi at this point, because he's the one that went over in the Dome. So this is the second year in a row Nakamura's main evented. Now Tanahashi gets to that point, but Nakamura went over, and they were still the tag team champions. And there was also a tournament underneath that and things that drew pretty well, but it was 46,000 in the Dome for that show. So again, it went from 45,000 to 46, not a huge drop, but they're no longer just packing it solid like they had been before.
Right.
Like some of this MMA stuff, and it was a submission tournament that was underneath it. So they were having like 2-minute long matches with Yuji Nagata, and they had Ron Waterman, who had been in OVW, and some of these former MMA guys that they were bringing in and doing very short submission only match tournament before they led up to this thing. So still some of that MMA mix that didn't quite work was getting in there, and the crowd was a little bit smaller. But nevertheless, when we leave off for today, because we are running out of time here, Tanahashi has become a 2-time tag team champion. He's teaming with and wrestling against Shinsuke Nakamura. He has now headlined a January 4th Tokyo Dome show, and he is ready to become the icon and start to work his way up that card and get closer and closer to that IWGP heavyweight title that has thus far eluded him. So a very strong 2 years after a slow-ish start, and then, a near miss health-wise. So things looking up for the Ace. Yeah, we're talking history here. We're going to go back to Hiroshi Tanahashi again. Now, where we left off with Hiroshi, the first week we talked about his early struggles. He had a couple of years there where he was just kind of treading water early in his career, paying his dues. And then he had the thing where he was stabbed by his girlfriend, who was a public figure. She was a news reporter or a TV reporter. I don't know if it was really news or if she was doing features. But point being, we almost lost him. He had a collapsed lung, and he was out of action for a while. When he came back, everybody kind of realized that, that really talented kid we almost didn't have him back. And so it helped him in that way. So people were happy to see him back and up and at it in the ring. And then his talent began to shine through and began to work his way up the cards. When we left off, he had just headlined his very first Tokyo Dome January 4th show. And he had lost the under 30 title he had to his tag team partner, Shinsuke Nakamura. So at this point, Nakamura is the under 30 champion, and he and Tanahashi still the IWGP tag team champions. And so Tanahashi has made the Tokyo Dome main event, and that was in front of a pretty big crowd. I believe it was like around, in the 40 to 50,000 range, just a very big crowd there at the Dome, and had maybe been half a step behind Nakamura, who had already been a main eventer for a while. But now he's joining Nakamura in some of those main events, and he's his tag team partner. So as 2005 continued, Tanahashi's ascent up the cards also continued. And it was a pretty smooth ride. And to give you an idea how well it went, in April, Tanahashi won the New Japan Cup. He won his very first New Japan Cup. He defeated Nakanishi in the finals, and he beat Tenzan, Koji Kanemoto, and Nagata along the way. So all big stars he would take down on the way to winning his first New Japan Cup. That would lead to another run with the under 30 title, however. So at this point, Nakamura wasn't defending it. And the company requested he relinquish the title because Nakamura had his eyes on other things, notably the World Championship. So at that point, he relinquished the title, and they had a tournament to crown a new champion, and Tanahashi won that tournament on June 18th, and that was during the Super Junior Tour. And he took the title back. So once again, he's a double champ. He's the under 30 champion. He's tag team champion with Shinsuke. He beat Yano in the finals, by the way, of that under 30 tournament. And he would go on to hold that title for almost a full year again. So now he's won the New Japan Cup, tournament. He won the under 30 tournament to create a new champion, and we're just now heading into the G1. Now, he did not advance in the G1 that year. He finished about middle of the pack. Masachono, Mr. August himself, and won the tournament this year. And then after that, as he is the double champion, he spent a month or so in CMLL. He and Nakamura both went over there for a little bit over a month. So most of September, coming out of that G1 hangover anyway, they were over in Mexico. It's the closest thing Tanahashi ever really had to an excursion. He never was away for a year. He stayed with the company and did not go over to the United States much. He did like little hits here and there. But this was the longest he'd been away from New Japan without an injury, basically. And so he was out there working Friday nights in Mexico City and other towns. He also in January 2006, by the way, made a couple of shots for TNA. He lost to AJ Styles in TNA, beat Roderick Strong and all that. He and Nakamura ended up dropping the tag team belts to Tenzan and Chono in October, and that was the end of that tag team. We mentioned before that there was always respect between Nakamura and Tanahashi, but not necessarily friendship. They were just different people. It was always respectful. And I mentioned, if you read Nakamura's book, you can see the little tension up there. I think these guys kind of rubbed each other the wrong way a little bit over time. But they would continue to be generational rivals, of course. But that tag team was done after that. Later that year, and that was the end of that team. So we go into 2006. In 2006, he earned a title shot against IWGP champion, who was, get ready for it, Brock Lesnar. So you see him as part of the IWGP package. And so he earned a title shot against Brock Lesnar. Now, Jeremy, you will be shocked to find out.
I don't think I'll be shocked.
You might not be shocked to find out that match didn't happen. And I'm sure you'll be astonished to find out that the reason that match didn't happen is because Brock simply stopped going to Japan. He never minded the whole thing. Not only did he stop going, he kept the belt. Just never even sent the belt back. Just like, heck with it. I'm not going anymore. He Brocked himself right out of the gig. So they decided to have, guess what? A tournament, go figure, to determine a new IWGP World Heavyweight Champion. They got themselves a brand new spanking belt. The other one did ended up making its way back into circulation, by the way. There was another, was Anoki Genome Project promotion that started up, and they made Brock the champion, and he used that belt. And somebody threw out enough money for Brock to come back, and never mind. It didn't end up working out, but that belt did make its way back to Japan and out of Brock's closet. So anyway, he went into this tournament to crown a new IWGP champion. If you remember, Tanahashi has had success in tournaments before. And this one was a semifinals and finals in one night. And the other three people involved were Giant Bernard. So that was Matt Bloom, the trainer in NXT. Akebono, one of the all-time great Yokozuna from Grand Sumo, who had transitioned out of Grand Sumo into pro wrestling. A massive human being, Chad Rowan. We talked about him a little bit not too long ago after he passed away. And Yuji Nagata. So Tanahashi beat Nagata in the semifinals. Bernard managed to beat Akebono. And then in Sapporo, he defeated Giant Bernard, and he became the new IWGP champion. It's the first time Hiroshi Tanahashi made it all the way to the top, and he was officially the champ finally. So didn't get to beat Brock to do it, but there it is. So now he's going into G1 as the champion. So, he's not going to win it. And he didn't. Tenzan won it that year. But later in the year, he did go to the G1 Tag League Finals with Koji Kanemoto as his partner, and he lost to Nakamura and Chono in the finals there. And in January, he was of 2007. We move over to 2007. At that January 4th show, he was in the semifinal of the very first show labeled Wrestle Kingdom. So this is the very first Wrestle Kingdom show. And the original concept to Wrestle Kingdom, Jeremy, is similar to what they're doing with Wrestle Dynasty. The entire point of Wrestle Kingdom is that there were people from other promotions coming in to wrestle on New Japan cards or New Japan wrestlers against other companies and things. So in that one, he defeated Taiyo Kia to retain his IWGP title. And like I said, that was second from the top because the main event was a Super Dream tag match with Masachono and Keiji Muto, two of the original Three Musketeers there teaming together, and they have been long-time rivals before this. They teamed together to defeat Tenkozy, Tenzan and Kojima. That was the main event. Also on that card, by the way, Minoru Suzuki defeated Yuji Nagata by ref stoppage to retain the All Japan Triple Crown. So Minoru Suzuki actually defended All Japan's Triple Crown on that same show. So those are the top three matches, basically. The dream match at the very top with those big name stars that have been stars since the mid-90s. And then you had Tanahashi's defense and Minoru Suzuki's defense. Now, remember how I mentioned also that this was during that time where they had wounded the company a little bit by mixing in MMA?
Right,
right. Okay, so this one didn't have that. We had all these other people coming in, but I mentioned how that had already started sliding downhill. The previous year, between 40 and 50,000. The first Wrestle Kingdom show, 28,000. So crowd down almost 15,000 people from the year before. So you're starting to see those wounds really take hold within New Japan, and the crowd's starting to shrink after years and years of packing the Tokyo Dome for everything. They were going to struggle to fill that building going forward. So he would defend that title 4 times. He ended up losing in April to Nagata, Yuji Nagata, who was kind of in the position that the old guard is in now, in that Nagata had been the star for years and years. Now these younger guys like Nakamura and Tanahashi were coming up, and he was holding on as best he could. And he did beat, he won the New Japan Cup, Nagata did, and won the right to challenge Tanahashi, and he beat Tanahashi. So Tanahashi's former champion. Now he's going into the G1. Now you get a chance to have another first. He got back on the road to the title, and he won his first G1 climax in the year 2007. He finished behind Nakamura in the B block, but the top 2 guys from each block ended up going to the semifinals. From there, he beat Togi Makabe, and then he defeated the IWGP champion, Yuji Nagata, in the finals. And that would give him a rematch with Nagata. And that would be on October 7th. So here's another precedent, actually. It wasn't for the Wrestle Kingdom title shot the following year. He won and challenged in October. So Tanahashi did, in fact, win the title back, and he carried the belt all the way back to the Dome again. So this time they come back around to the Tokyo Dome. They get back to another match between Tanahashi and Shinsuke Nakamura. Now, if you remember, 2 years before this, Nakamura had beaten Tanahashi to capture that under 30 title. Now they're Nakamura's challenging him for the IWGP belt. This Wrestle Kingdom 2 had a lot of TNA talent on it, by the way. Christopher Daniels, Abyss, Christian Cage, AJ Styles. This was before AJ came over and joined Bullet Club. Petey Williams was on the card. This is an interesting, by the way, the opening match there. Christian Cage, AJ, and Pete Williams beat Milano Collection AT when he was still wrestling. Minoru, not Minoru Suzuki, a wrestler named Minoru, and Prince Devitt in the opener. So you got a little Finn Balor in there to go with AJ and Christian and Pete Williams. Team 3D, the Dudley Boys, who weren't the Dudley Boys at that point because, copyright. They beat Makabe and Toru Yano in a hardcore match on that show. Giant Bernard was there, Travis Tomko, if you remember him. They beat the Steiner brothers. And in a major match, second from the top, Kurt Angle defeated Yuji Nagata. So that's what we were talking about back then at the second Wrestle Kingdom.
Definitely a different era.
Definitely a different era. And it only drew 27,000. So down 1,000 from the year before. New Japan's just kind of having some issues. So in that match, January 4th, 2007, Tanahashi loses the title to Shinsuke Nakamura. If you look at how things were going, it's not hard to figure. So since he won the title, attendance at the huge January shows has been falling off 15, 16,000 off of what it was before. They weren't running the Dome in the mid-year anymore because back when we started this history of Tanahashi, they were doing almost quarterly Dome shows in front of 40,000 people. Now they're only running it about once a year or so, and it's drawn 28, 27,000. So it's, even though he was popular with the fans, and even though the people were reacting to him, there were fewer.
Something wasn't firing on all cylinders. They
went with Nakamura. And Tanahashi would not be in the world title picture for the next year. And when we pick it up again, we're moving into 2008 toward the end of the aughts, and when Tanahashi makes another surge. But I have to say, his initial run with the IWGP title, his first G1, his first New Japan Cup, it's not all his fault. I'm not trying to put that on Tanahashi at all. I'm just saying that he was not the savior yet that he would eventually become. Oh, absolutely. I mean, there were all kinds of things wrong with New Japan at this time. All kinds of things wrong with New Japan at the time. This was not Tanahashi's fault, but he was the champion. And so at that point, they decided to try to move in the Nakamura direction rather than the Tanahashi direction at the beginning of this time. And it would be a little while before Tanahashi would really rise to be the ace again. And we'll pick that up next time as he really becomes the once in a century talent and the ace. The more I look into this, the more what a difficult road this was for him. This was not a guy who was an instant success. No, not an instant success. Was not a guy who was handed anything, and more than once was kind of knocked down the cards a little bit and had to claw his way back up through work rate, charisma, everything else. We know he did it, but it is fascinating to see that this was not anything resembling a smooth road for Hiroshi Tanahashi or New Japan. Like I said, this was not, it wasn't that he was doing a poor job as champion. The company was really faltering at this point, and the financials were a mess for a whole bunch of reasons that weren't even to do with pro wrestling. And it was real hard times. And they would need an ace. One's coming, but they don't know it's him yet. So when last we left, he had just dropped the IWGP title to Shinsuke Nakamura at Wrestle Kingdom 2. So he was not the champion, but he was an unquestioned main eventer, and the chase to get him back to the top was on. And so he remained in a very featured role, even though he didn't have the title. He was on February 17th of that year, this is 2008 here, he was third from the top of a card at Sumo Hall, where he beat AJ Styles. And this was before AJ was in the Bullet Club. He was a TNA guy. And it was a featured match there. That was underneath a tag team title match. And then Shinsuke Nakamura beating Kurt Angle in an IWGP title match, which would be pretty amazing. I need to see if that one's been added to the archives again from a lot of those things where New Japan wrestled TNA. A lot of that stuff's not a New Japan world and wasn't before the transition to the new NJPW world because of the rights about the footage for the TNA wrestlers. So a lot of those matches, when it was New Japan versus TNA, aren't on there. Some of those interpromotional stuff never went up, but we'll see. That show drew 9,500 though. So, and then he went on to a very busy tournament schedule. So in March, Tanahashi became the first man to win 2 New Japan Cups. He defeated Giant Bernard in the finals that year. Of course, that's Matt Bloom, NXT trainer. He faced Nakamura for the title just 1 week later after winning the cup for the second time at Korakuen Hall, but lost. And they crammed over 2,000 people into Korakuen from that one. And that's kind of a throwback to when I started watching Japanese wrestling, when they would just standing room only the hell out of that place. And a sellout now is about 1,600, and they could cram about 600 more up in standing room spots and in those balconies that kind of look over everything, where they used to have all the banners, and they used to fill all that up. And then from there, New Japan was also working not only with TNA, but they were working with All Japan. They were working with Noah. This is when the business was a little shaky. So everyone was kind of doing things to help everybody else out, not really help everybody else out so much as help themselves by generating some interest. And there's always one thing that people are always curious about, and that's the interpromotional feud. It just works every single time. And so they went back to that, and he was in the Champion Carnival. So he entered their tournament, and he won Block A. The other guys in Block A were Toshiaki Kawada, one of the all-time greats, Keiji Muto, all-time great, Satoshi Kojima, all-time great, Teo Kia, who was excellent. But he ended up drawing with Muto and Kawada and beat Kia and Kojima 6 points, won Block A. Suwama won Block B, and the other people in there were Joe Daring, Kensuke Sasaki, Minoru Suzuki was in Block B, and Osamu Nishimura. But Tanahashi went to the finals of the Champion Carnival, lost to Suwama there. So still, this year was very valuable in that he had a lot of high-profile singles matches. We've noted that when you wrestle under this system, the New Japan system, you only have singles matches usually every once in a while once you're a big star. You spend most of your time in those multi-man tags and to build to the big shows at which you have a singles match. But here he was having regular singles matches against top guys from all Japan. He went into the New Japan Cup and won it, so he had a bunch of singles matches there. Then it was over to the G1. So even though he's not the champion, he's we're seeing him in a lot of featured singles matches in high profile situations. But he also suffered a bit of an injury in the summer, though. He only scored 4 points in the G1, but nevertheless, he was almost all of his G1 matches were the top one or second from the top. He was in a very prominent spot. He also ended up teaming up with AJ against Nakamura and Kurt Angle, and later appeared at a TNA taping. He teamed with Volador Jr. there, actually, in a tag match. He stayed there for a few weeks when TNA toured a little bit. Not everything was a TV taping for TNA back then. So he stayed away, and one of the people he wrestled consistently was Consequences Creed, who's now known as Xavier Woods. So there you go. Tanahashi and Xavier Woods matches back then. And he came back to New Japan in November to enough fanfare that his matches on the tour were touted as high fly star comeback to X town, like whatever town they were in. High fly star comeback to Hokkaido. High fly star comeback to Nagoya.
There was a signature way of advertising him.
Yeah, but this was enough of a thing that Tanahashi's back, and he often teamed with a little bit with Nakamura, but a lot with Hiroki Goto. He teamed some with Tetsuya Naito back then. This would still have been Stardust Naito before he went to Mexico, and then he also teamed with Ryusuke Taguchi quite a bit in that time. Those were kind of he had a lot of different tag team partners over this run, but those were the most consistent. This all culminated in Nagoya as he defeated Giant Bernard in the main event of a show that drew 8,500 people, and it sealed his place at Wrestle Kingdom 3. So it was a match to determine his spot at Wrestle Kingdom 3. His comeback indeed was complete. At Wrestle Kingdom 3, January 4th, he defeated Keiji Muto for the IWGP title at a show that drew 40,000 people. So now things were cooking once again. By the way, other matches at that Wrestle Kingdom 3 were Nakamura and Goto beating Mitsuharu Misawa and Takashi Segura in a rather tasty Noah versus New Japan match. That must have been fantastic. And unfortunately, Misawa didn't have terribly long to live after that, although, of course, no one had any idea. And Team 3D. So this was Bubba Ray and Devon, who weren't Bubba Ray and Devon for copyright reasons, but they were the Team 3D. They defeated Makabe and Toru Yano in a hardcore match for the IWGP tag team titles on that show. So Makabe and Yano, the version of them, they hadn't split up yet. Yano hadn't left to form Chaos and all that kind of stuff. They were still teaming together. The most violent players, the MVPs. And the opener of that one, and I'm bringing this up for a reason here. Opening the show at Wrestle Kingdom 3, Milano Collection AT, Minoru, not Minoru Suzuki, just single name Minoru, and Taiichi Ishikari against Mitsushita Hirasawa, who eventually became Captain New Japan and was not a major star, but his partners were Kazuchika Okada and Nobuo Yoshihashi.
As young lions?
Couple of young lions out there. Okada and Yoshihashi as young lions. So after all that, Tanahashi has now beaten Keiji Muto, and we all know that when Muto loses, he doesn't stick around, right? So anyway, he needed to name a new opponent. So he called out Nakamura, since we have mentioned in previous weeks that he and Nakamura have been tangling for a long time, and Nakamura had beaten him in some high-profile matches before, including at Wrestle Kingdom. Tanahashi wanted that big win. And he broke through and finally did. He defended his title successfully against Nakamura in Sumo Hall in front of over 9,000 people. This match for Tanahashi, a little bit similar to what happened when Okada finally overcame Tanahashi at Wrestle Kingdom. Remember, he tried him and failed a couple of times. Now, of course, when he came back from excursion, he beat Tanahashi, and that's the big February surprise, right? But then they had their Wrestle Kingdom matches, and Okada would keep hitting Tanahashi and losing, right? Well, this was the big thing for him. Tanahashi had lost a couple of high-profile matches to Nakamura. Now he's finally won one. He defended that title a few times, but he dropped it to Manabu Nakanishi in May, but that was just really to regain it at Dominion. They just did the kind of flip-flop there. And that was the beginning of his 4th title reign. He went into 2009's G1 as the champion, so of course he didn't win it. But he was tied with Togi Makabe and Masato Tanaka at the top of Block A. He advanced, Tanahashi did, on tiebreakers. Nakamura, meanwhile, dominated the B block. Just rolled through it with 12 points. Nobody else had more than 7. Nakamura and Tanahashi met in the semifinals. Now, not only did Nakamura beat him, but Tanahashi suffered a broken orbital bone in the match, and that forced him to vacate the IWGP Heavyweight title. So, Nakamura and Makabe met in the finals of the G1, and Makabe won. They had a rematch of the G1 finals. Now, they didn't know that Tanahashi was going to be out and had to vacate when they had the finals. So later on, they figured that out. So they rematched Nakamura and Makabe, the 2 biggest stars that were left with Tanahashi on the shelf, to fill the vacancy. And this time, Nakamura won it back. So
Got it.
Tanahashi has lost to Nakamura a bunch of times, beaten him for that title, but then then Nakamura in a match with Nakamura suffers the injury. Now Nakamura has the belt again. He's got to climb that mountain again. So Tanahashi returned in October, and that led to him challenging Nakamura, but he lost at the Destruction show in Sumo Hall that year. So that was at Destruction. And then with Nakamura defending the IWGP title against Yoshihiro Takayama in the main event of Wrestle Kingdom 4, Tanahashi needed something to do. The theme of Wrestle Kingdom 4 was Noah versus New Japan again. So this time, Hiroki Goto challenged Takashi Sagura for the GHC title. So the Noah title was being defended. Naomichi Marufuji challenged and defeated Tiger Mask, the current Tiger Mask, for the IWGP Junior Heavyweight title. Yujiro and Naito were teaming up, and they defeated Giant Bernard and Carl Anderson and Team 3D to win the IWGP Tag Team titles. So Team 3D held those titles most of the year that time. But Tanahashi decided he was going to challenge Go Shiozaki in what was billed as Ace versus Ace. So while neither one of them held the title, they were sort of the biggest star that wasn't the champion. And they had Ace versus Ace match. Tanahashi won it with the high fly flow. So still seen as a big hero. And then on January 31st of that year, Tanahashi faced young lion Kazuchika Okada in Okada's farewell match. And that was second from the top at Differ Ariake Arena, which was Noah's home base right there. We wouldn't see Kazuchika Okada again until the next Wrestle Kingdom. But of course, what was going on there was he had sent off the man who would become his next big generational rival. Next week, when we come back, we will talk about his big feud with the very beginnings of Chaos, and particularly with his current partner, Toru Yano. It was really Tanahashi's first true hate feud. One of the first that really went into things like stipulations and humiliating each other, and really one of his first real hatred type of feuds.
Grudge feuds.
Got very heated in 2010 with Toru Yano, and we're going to talk about that. And of course, just on the horizon, this guy who's sitting around as Okato in TNA, who would become perhaps the only guy better than Tanahashi at this. So we will lead all up to that next time we touch base with Tanahashi. But the ace is indeed the ace now. He's being billed at it. Even when he's not the champion, he's in a major match at Wrestle Kingdom. Things are going pretty well for Hiroshi Tanahashi, but he has heels on the horizon. They're going to make his life pretty miserable. Tanahashi. So when we last left him, as we go through his remarkable career, it was 2010. He was unquestionably a main eventer in New Japan. He defeated Go Shiozaki at Wrestle Kingdom 4, and then sent Okada off onto excursion on the 31st of January by beating Okada. So at that point, he's not the champion, but he is one of the very top stars. He had a very interesting couple of years here. And it started kind of the day before he sent Okada off to TNA. He teamed with Manabu Nakanishi, and they lost their match to Toru Yano and Shinsuke Nakamura. And the only thing that was remarkable about this is that Yano beat Tanahashi in the match. Yano had been teaming with Togi Makabe as the Great Bash heels, right? You know, the most violent players and all this. But he had turned on Makabe by that point and broke up that group and joined Nakamura, and they formed Chaos. All right. So all that kind of happened around that time. So Yano had turned on Makabe, joined up with Nakamura in this rebel group, heel group, Chaos. Chaos started adding more members, but Yano was the one that beat Tanahashi in that match. So to further help build Yano, they had him get this win over Hiroshi Tanahashi. And in February, Tanahashi was teaming with guys like Makabe, who had been turned on, Honma, and others to feud with this new faction. And on the other side of it was, of course, Nakamura and Yano, but they also had Carl Anderson. Ishii joined up. Geto and Jado were over there in Chaos. And at that point, basically, Yujiro Takahashi was. Naito kind of was. You know, that team, Yujiro and Naito, were still around at that point, but it was a matter of those guys being more into the Chaos side. Tanahashi was teaming with Taguchi, Makabe, Honma, and some others. So back at Sumo Hall on February 14th, Tanahashi got his win back over Yano in the semi-main event. That was when Manabu Nakanishi, one of Tanahashi's allies, lost to Nakamura in an IWGP title match on top. So while Chaos had the World Heavyweight title, Tanahashi got his win back over Yano. Now, why do I even mention one singles match? Well, because afterwards, Masato Tanaka, who was on earlier, attacked Tanahashi after the match with Yano. They beat him down, and Jeremy cut off a chunk of Tanahashi's precious hair. My God, the hair. I know. And so this was all a part of making Chaos into the big heel faction at the time. There was no Bullet Club yet. Wasn't even really a Suzuki-gun in the way that we know it yet, anyway. So that was the big heel group, was Chaos. So he didn't need to win Tanahashi the New Japan Cup that year. Remember, he became the first two-time winner the year before. But he had a strong feud going. He didn't need to win it. So he was bounced by Naito in the second round. So again, a guy that was Chaos adjacent upset Tanahashi right there. And basically Chaos was tormenting Tanahashi's life. So he was knocked out of the New Japan Cup in the second round. Hiroki Goto won that one, by the way, beating Makabe in the finals. And Tana went on feuding with Chaos. And they took that feud all the way to Dontaku in 2010. And Yano got another win over Tanahashi. Just couldn't quite get over Toru Yano, believe it or not, at this point. Is now one of his tag team partners for the six-man title. But clearly the Great Bash Heel Hantai group was also a factor because they got the win in the main event. At Dontaku that year, Makabe won the IWGP title for the first time, defeating Shinsuke Nakamura. So after 10 years, Makabe has now held the belt. And to put that over, though, to put over that loss to Yano, where he got his hair cut, then he got beat by Yano, he disappeared for most of May in that year. He went to Mexico. And he went down to and won the Trios title. He won the Trios title in Arena, Mexico. And guess who his partners were? It was Okamura, who we always see as part of Fantastica Mania, right? And the other one was a man named Taichi Ishikari, who is the current Holy Emperor Taichi. Back before he was just before he was Taichi, he was Taichi Ishikari, which is not his real name. It was just the name he was using in Mexico at that point. And they defeated, listen to who they beat for this Trios title. They defeated Hector Garza, Hijo del Fantasma, who is now Santos Escobar in WWE, and La Mascara, the Mask, which is not Jim Carrey. I checked. He stayed in Mexico for most of the month of May. He teamed with Mystico, Atlantis, so the top guys, and even teamed with Ultimo Guerrero a little bit in there. So now he's not just a guy on excursion going off to Mexico. It wasn't like that. He went to Mexico as a star and he was in main events, holding titles, teaming with legends. So that's where Tanahashi was. Meanwhile, in Japan, they were putting over the idea that he'd been humiliated. He'd had his hair, a chunk of his hair cut off. He'd been beaten by Yano Chaos, knocked him out of the New Japan Cup. He was having his first real grudge feud. Now, when he came back, there was a natural thing. You hack off a chunk of the guy's hair, we're going to have a hair versus hair match, right? So that was set up for Dominion against Toru Yano. And what we had earlier in that card, Prince Devitt won the IWGP Junior title from Naomichi Marufuji from Noah. Makabe beat Noah's Go Shiozaki in the main event. But they had the hair versus hair match, and Tanahashi got his revenge, beating Toru Yano, saving those beautiful locks, and shaving Toru Yano's head. He needed help, though. Tajiri, you remember Tajiri from ECW and WWE? He had been a rival of Tanahashi's in the past, but he came out with Kushida to help fend off Takashi Iizuka, Iron Fingers Iizuka, who wanted to save Yano, and they teased the idea that Yano wasn't going to have his hair cut because Iizuka came out. But in the end, he was run off by the baby faces, and Kushida and Tajiri helped him shave Yano's head. After that, the focus shifted to Iizuka, and he beat Iizuka in a special singles match in July that you could only win by rendering your opponent unconscious. That was called a deep sleep to lose match. Deep sleep to lose match is what that was called, and so he won that one. So now we're getting the whole thing where Yano was running through.
Because if you fall asleep, you lose.
Aha, there you got it. So Tanahashi right now is starting to run through the Chaos roster and is feuding with the whole group. They get to the G1. He went all the way to the finals of the G1 that year, but lost in the finals to Satoshi Kojima. So he may not have been champion, but his feud with Yano was the semi-main to the IWGP title every time they met in a singles match. And he made the G1 finals. So Tanahashi wasn't the champion, but he was one of the biggest stars in the entire company. It may have felt like he didn't necessarily need the belt to draw, at that point. May have been the philosophy. Or, again, Nakamura is the champion. He is in charge of this new heel faction. It might just be to put over the new heel group as well. But either way, Tanahashi, major star, and they're kind of keeping he and Nakamura away from each other for the time being. Although he is feuding with Nakamura's group. What I mean by that is they met in a lot of multi-person tags. They would meet in 6-man tags, 8-man tags, not a lot of singles matches at the time between Tanahashi and Nakamura. They kind of kept him away from the world title for the moment. That's really what I meant. They wrestled each other plenty. Then he and Tajiri are now friends, so they wrestled in the World Tag League that year. But in December, they had a special series of singles matches to determine a number one contender to Kojima. Now, Kojima had beaten Makabe coming off the G1. So Makabe beat Nakamura to get a little bit of heat back for Great Bash heel. And then Kojima won G1, beat Makabe. So now Kojima is the World Heavyweight Champion. And Tanahashi wrestled 2 nights in a row in Osaka, winning special singles matches with Hiroki Goto and Tetsuya Naito. And so he was named the number one contender to go into Wrestle Kingdom. So that was the main event of Wrestle Kingdom 5. Tanahashi went into Wrestle Kingdom 5 as the number one contender to the championship. Tanahashi faced Kojima in the main event that night, but it was in front of a very weak crowd. New Japan claimed 40,000 people, Jeremy. That was utterly laughable. Your friend Dave Meltzer with the Observer put the number around 18,000. That's how big the discrepancy was. And Meltzer said there were about 18,000 people in the building. New Japan says no, 40,000. I don't know how big the Tokyo Dome would have to be to make that crowd 40,000. They would probably have to hold 200,000 in order for for that to be 40,000 people, because it was about a quarter full.
I'm no mathematician, but that's an over 50% reduction of the actual.
Calling that one 40,000 was insane. I mean, like that was absolutely insane.
It is an over 2%, 200% fake increase in attendance, or a 50% reduction.
Absolutely nuts. By the way, Okada came back for one match in Japan from his excursion. He was gone to TNA most of the time, but he came back for this one, and he teamed with Goto in a loss to Takashi Sagura and Toshihiro Takayama in that one.
Sure, they were planning ahead.
Yeah, the only other time Okada wrestled for quote-unquote New Japan is when New Japan ran shows in the United States that worked with TNA. This is when New Japan was working with TNA a lot. And of course, I mean, Okada was over there on excursion, but they would also have TNA wrestlers into Japan. And so that was it. So he wrestled for him at the 2300 Arena in Philadelphia, and that type of thing, where he met up with some New Japan guys while he was away. But aside from this match at Wrestle Kingdom 5, Okada was gone for about 2 years.
All right.
Let's see. Other note, you know how I like to go back and note some other interesting matches.
You're going to eventually do an Okada. You're going to do a recap on all these other guys. These intersections are important. You are laying down webs of timelines. I get it.
there was a TNA title match at Wrestle Kingdom that year, and Naito lost to Jeff Hardy, which is an interesting clash of styles there. Also, Rob Van Dam defeated Yano in a hardcore match earlier in that night. So you got the ECW TNA guy there.
There are things I try not to think about because my mental health is more important.
Yeah.
Those fall into that category.
Okay, fair enough. So Tanahashi, though, he defeats Satoshi Kojima in the main event of that Wrestle Kingdom, and he would be the champion throughout most of the year of 2011. And he defended it many times over the time, all the major shows, the ones that you would expect. And then in the G1 that year, he went all the way through the G1. They did their classic booking of the World Heavyweight Champion in the G1, and that he got to the very edge of making the finals, but lost to a top contender to miss out. In this case, it was Naito. Naito defeated him on the last day of block play, and Naito went to the finals against Shinsuke Nakamura, and Nakamura was the G1 champion that year. Other participants, by the way, in the G1 was La Sombra, who's now Andrade in WWE. He was in it. So was MVP. MVP was in the G1 tournament that year. So Tanahashi did defeat Nakamura for Nakamura's G1 title shot. And again, they weren't doing the thing yet where it happens at Wrestle Kingdom. And we're not doing it this year either, but for years, that was the whole thing. We weren't at that stage yet. If you won the G1, you got your title shot in September or October in there. And in this case, Tanahashi defeated Nakamura for that one. And this is where, by the way, that's the match where Tanahashi lost some of his front teeth. That's why he has the veneer in there. He took a knee in the mush. Took a knee in the mush and knocked some of his teeth out there. So at this point, though, he was getting close to Yuji Nagata's record of 10 title defenses. So at this stage, Nagata came out to challenge him. And we thought we were going to see Nagata try to defend his record, so to speak, and win the title back, stop Tanahashi's reign, right? But before he could, Tanahashi was attacked by Yano again and laid out. And Yano stole the IWGP belt. That kept everyone in suspense until after World Tag League, because Yano carried that belt all the way to Power Struggle on November 12th. With Tanahashi beating Yano by submission, he got his belt back and he kept the championship. He was always the champion, but Yano was parading around with the belt the same way that House of Torture sometimes steals the hardware. Yano did that, but now he's got it all back. So now we mentioned he was threatening Nagata's record. Nagata challenged him to try to preserve it. They had their match on December 4th. Tanahashi won that title match to tie Nagata's record. So he beat Nagata for his 10th title defense, and now he has the record. And that ensured him he would take the title all the way one trip fully around the sun to Wrestle Kingdom 6. Won it at 5, and he would defend it at at Wrestle Kingdom 6. At Wrestle Kingdom 6, he faced Minoru Suzuki for the IWGP title. Now, we mentioned that attendance at Wrestle Kingdom 5 was about 18,000. Now we're up to 23,000, which is a healthy increase. If you look at that, I mean, percentage-wise, I don't have it in my head, but it went up $5,000 from one year over the other. So things were starting to head in the correct direction again. And I think this is starting to be where we see people talking about how Tanahashi kind of saved the company, and they're being a little bit dramatic about that. But there was a significant increase year over year, Tanahashi coming back as the champion. And things were heading the right way. The opener, by the way, that night was a tag match with Captain New Japan and Tama Tonga, who was still basically doing his Jimmy Superfly Snuka impression, defeating Tomoaki Honma and Kyosuke Mikami. So that was an early El Desperado Wrestle Kingdom moment right there with him in the young lion gear and no mask and all that stuff. So I believe that match is on World if you want to go back and see it.
I might
Kaiji Muto defeated Tetsuya Naito in the semifinal that night, and that's a match that they referenced a lot in building up to the Muto retirement match with Naito. I don't know if you remember when they did that. So that was a big moment there where, Naito again had come close to getting over the mountain, but had been smacked back down again. So that was all part of that storyline with Muto's retirement. As for Tanahashi, he defeated Minoru Suzuki to break the IWGP record for most title defenses. He now had 11. So he beat Suzuki in the main event. He's now main evented yet another Wrestle Kingdom. He's starting to become synonymous with that spot. But after he won, he was challenged by a man he had sent off to Excursion nearly 2 years before, a
Uh-oh.
man who had defeated Yoshihashi earlier in the evening.
Uh-oh.
And that night, Tanahashi accepted the challenge of the new Rainmaker, Kazuchika Okada.
Uh-oh.
They would meet in February for their title match, a match that would, of course, change the course of New Japan's history. So next time we show up, we will cover that whole beginning of that generational rivalry there, as Tanahashi spent 1 year as one of the very top draws in a blood feud with Toru Yano, and then another year on top as the IWGP champion, setting new records, and crowds are increasing. Okada is coming back. Big things are in store for both Tanahashi and the company as a whole, and we will cover that next time. All right. So when we left off, we were toward the end of Hiroshi Tanahashi's record reign. He was the World Heavyweight Champion. He had just defeated Minoru Suzuki at Wrestle Kingdom, and he was challenged afterwards by the new guy back from Excursion, Kazuchika Okada. So he was still the champion. So he comes out of Wrestle Kingdom. He's got Okada on the horizon, but he had some interesting matches during Fantastica Mania that year, by the way. He started wrestling Okada in preview matches right off the bat. It happened immediately. And he had Okada and Volador Jr. against Tanahashi and La Sombra. So Andrade right there. Plus Okada, Nakamura, and El Mephisto against Tanahashi, Tetsuya Naito, and El Diamante. So there were some interesting little matches there at Fantastica Mania as they move forward toward that big match. So they previewed the big match February 12th, New Beginning in Osaka. And that is where he lost the title to Okada in what is still called the February Surprise. Most people figured that Okada was there to be a title defense in the record run, not to get the win. Again, guy was just back. But they were very confident. Gedo was very confident in Okada. In fact, it shared with somebody. I don't remember who. Maybe Jericho or something like that. Somebody he knew just kind of said, "What do you think of Okada?" And he said, "It's going to be champion." And they said, "Oh, you feel that good about him someday?" Thinking maybe years ahead. And Gedo just kind of smiled because he knew, in about 30 days. That's how long. So a week later, after losing the title to Okada, he was at All Together 2, and he was main eventing a 6-man match with Suwama and Takeshi Morishima in a win over Go Shiozaki, Tetsuya Naito, and Seiya Sanada, who was not yet Sanada, but he was teaming with Tetsuya Naito. So we actually got Naito and Sanada as a team before LIJ, and when Sanada was still an All Japan wrestler. Kenta Kobashi teamed with Keiji Muto underneath in a win over Takao Omori and Jun Akiyama. We're about to see Akiyama this coming weekend. So with now having lost the title, he made the finals of the New Japan Cup that year, but he lost to Hirooki Goto. That was the year Goto won the cup. And he was still otherwise facing off with combinations of Okada and Nakamura, along with other Chaos members in these multi-man matches on top of house shows all over Japan. But 2012 was going to be a very strong run, box office-wise, for New Japan. Mentioned that Wrestle Kingdom had gone up about 5,000 in attendance to 23,000 that year. So not huge there, but there were signs this year that things were really picking up. And most of the time, his partners were guys like Hirooki Goto, Naito, who was not LIJ Naito yet, Captain New Japan, who was usually in there to take falls. He was the Jado of that group, if you will. And Tama Tonga, who was pre-Bullet Club Tama. And that was because he was headed for a big rematch with Okada at Dominion. So for basically the first half of the year, Okada and Tanahashi tangled in these multi-person tags at house show after house show after house show. And then at Dominion, Tanahashi defeated Okada and won the IWGP title back. That was in front of 6,850 people. So a strong crowd there in Osaka for that. Interesting match in the opener, Jeremy. Kenny Omega and Kota Ibushi, the Golden Lovers, teamed with Daisuke Sasaki to defeat Prince Devitt, Kushida, and Bushi, who was not yet LIJ Bushi. So there you have it. Let's see what else we have there. Liger and Tiger Mask were a tag team, and they defeated Takamichi Noku and Taichi for the junior heavyweight tag team titles. Back in the day, that Taichi was struggling to make the weight there in the junior division. MVP and Shelton Benjamin, who just joined AEW. They were a team. They beat Carl Anderson and Tama Tonga underneath. And Low Ki was the junior champion back then. He beat Ryusuke Taguchi. So, yeah. And an important note, Togi Makabe defeated Minoru Suzuki in the semifinal that night to earn the next title shot. And Tanahashi won that one on July 1st in front of a full 11,000 people at Sumo Hall.
Nice.
So things are really looking good now, right? He goes into the G1. He's the champion again, right? So does he win? No, he does not. But he scores 10 points in Block A along with Carl Anderson. But Anderson defeated Tanahashi on the last day of block play to win that tiebreaker and go into the final. So Carl Machine Gun Anderson went to the finals. Some other people in Block A, by the way, Yuji Nagata, Shelton Benjamin, Kojima, Suzuki, Naomichi Marufuji, who got a win over Tanahashi in that one. They were all in A block. And then in B block, Kazuchika Okada won with 10 points. The crew at 8, these are all the people that ended up on 8 points. This is a very dramatic final day. So Okada won with 10 points, but Lance Archer, Goto, Makabe, MVP, Naito, Tenzan, and Nakamura all finished with 8. Whew. The only guy that didn't have 8 or 10 points was Rush. He finished with 6. So a very tight race all the way through. Tanahashi lost to Anderson, I mentioned on the last day. That kept him out of the final. And Okada defeated Carl Anderson to win his first G1. If you also notice, it carefully kept Tanahashi and Okada apart. They were in different blocks. They didn't end up meeting in the final. Okada was the youngest winner ever at 24, the first since Goto to win his first G1, and Anderson was the first foreigner to make the final of the tournament since Rick Rude in 1992. So a lot of new directions going on in New Japan, but with Tanahashi as the champion. He then went over to CMLL for a while and was in the Universal Tournament. He advanced to the final. He defeated Marco Corleone, who was Mark Jindrak, if you remember that guy, Diamante Azul, and Volador before he lost to Damien El Terrible in the final. So he almost went to the final of the G1, did go to the final of the Universal Tournament for CMLL. He defended the IWGP title the rest of the year. He defeated Suzuki in an absolute classic at KOPW that year. I believe that was one of the match of the year candidates, and then went right back into feuding with Chaos. So at King of Pro Wrestling, though, they had 9,000 people in Sumo Hall for that one. So these big shows were doing well. By that time, Yujiro Takahashi had left Chaos and had turned on Naito. So they were in a feud. That led to a grudge match, which Yujiro won. So you imagine Yujiro Takahashi getting a win on Tetsuya Naito there at the King of Pro Wrestling show. Nakamura, meanwhile, was not in the picture. Okada is was the world heavyweight champion. Tanahashi won it back. Nakamura had gained the Intercontinental title and was making that his own. This would become very, very important in short order. So he defeated Goto in the semifinal on that show. So Nakamura was establishing the Intercontinental title as a draw in and of itself. Okada now was the G1 winner, and he defended his number one contendership in several singles matches as the year wore on. So not only did they keep Tanahashi and Okada apart, but they put both of them in jeopardy throughout the rest of the year. So Okada may have lost his number one contendership. Tanahashi may have lost his world title, all that stuff. But Okada beat Anderson in a number one contenders match at KOPW. And on November 11th, Tanahashi defeated Yujiro Takahashi in a world heavyweight title match that went 25 minutes. Can you imagine?
Yujiro, huh?
A Yujiro Takahashi match going 25. Now, if you watch him, it's a very different Yujiro than what we're getting here with Bullet Club, but or House of Torture or anything like that. But oh boy, if Tanahashi ever carried a match harder than he ever carried anything, that had to have been it. 25 minutes with Yujiro right there.
Let's see what they rated that match while you.
Oh boy, I'd be curious. Go ahead and find that one. Okada defeated Goto to keep that number one contender spot. So that set the official collision course for Wrestle Kingdom. Now, both of them have navigated all the various potholes on the way to the Wrestle Kingdom match. And we were going to get Tanahashi versus Okada at the Dome for the first time. And at Wrestle Kingdom 7, Tanahashi defeated Okada to retain the title. So after the February surprise, Okada kind of hit his head on the Tanahashi ceiling, so to speak. He lost the belt back to him, won the G1, but couldn't regain the belt again. And some interesting notes from Wrestle Kingdom 7, by the way. Hiromu Takahashi was in the Young Lion match in that one. So you can go back and watch that one on World, I believe. Masato Tanaka defeated Shelton Benjamin in a never open weight title match. Now, that belt had just been created in November of 2012. So there in January of 2013, that never open weight title was just starting to be a thing. And Shelton Benjamin was in the title match there with Tanaka, who was a member of Chaos back then. Tanaka was part of Nakamura's group. For the junior heavyweight title, Prince Devitt defeated Bushi and Low Ki. And that was the title match there. And Tenkozy beat Muto and Chijiro Otani, in a tag team title match. Of course, Otani severely injured in a match years later, but he was still part of a big match at Wrestle Kingdom back in 2013. Drew 29,000. So again, the last 3 years, 18,000, 23,000, now 29,000. Things are looking better. Moved on from that to, once again, he's still wrestling mostly Chaos guys. So Tanahashi's multi-person main events at the house shows, mostly against Chaos crew. But something important was about to happen. At the 41st anniversary show that March, he defeated Prince Devitt in the usual heavyweight title versus junior heavyweight title match. Okay. And that's the match where neither belt's on the line, right? Except Tanahashi said he would relinquish the heavyweight title if he lost. It's just to put extra stakes on it, I guess. But he won. Afterwards, Prince Devitt refused to shake his hand, kind of shoved him away. Something was wrong with Prince Devitt. Something was wrong with him. And after that, he started acting a little more churlish out there. The only person he seemed to get along with was his tag team partner, Ryusuke Taguchi, right? So the team of Carl Anderson and Tama Tonga had become a regular team and a regular foe of Tanahashi as well. But at an invasion attack at Sumo Hall, Okada defeated Tanahashi to win the IWGP title back. And on that show, Prince Devitt turned on Taguchi and brought in his enforcer, Bad Luck Fale, who had been King Fale before, after coming back from after leaving the Young Lion run. He was King Fale, then he became Bad Luck Fale, and he was the bouncer of the crew, which was not yet called Bullet Club, by the way. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention one thing. Can I go back a little bit? The
Sure.
41st anniversary show. The opening match was a Young Lion match. Hiromu Takahashi and Takaki Watanabe, who's now known as Evil, against Yohei Komatsu and Sho Tanaka. So we had Hiromu and Evil against Sho and Yo as the Young Lion match that time. So 4 for 4 with that batch of Young Lions, though, right? I mean, all of them turned out.
I mean, they do pretty well with the Young Lions in general, to be honest.
There are a few that kind of come and go and never make an impact, but their batting average is very strong. So
the batting average on the American ones from the last half of the decade was a little spotty as well.
Yeah, well, definitely. Yeah, there were a couple of misses in there. So we moved on to Dontaku. So at Dontaku, Tanahashi faced Carl Anderson for that top contender spot. Okay. And this wasn't like an official no. It was a special singles match, number one contender, and to get that shot back at Okada. Tanahashi won, but afterwards, Fale and Prince Devitt attacked. Tama Tonga came in and joined in the attack. And then Carl Anderson joined in, and then we had Bullet Club. So Devitt and Fale were already in an alliance and already heel. But after Tanahashi faced Anderson, what was supposed to be a babyface versus babyface match, afterwards, the whole crew attacks him. Anderson joins the attack, turns heel. Tama Tonga's a heel, and we have Bullet Club after that. So now Tanahashi had a new focus. And after most of a year, facing the Chaos crew, he's trying to get back at Bullet Club. But you got to put him over first. So Prince Devitt beat Tanahashi at Dominion in front of 7,240 people in Osaka with help from the Bullet Club. And that was his Dominion match, putting over Prince Devitt to help establish Bullet Club as a real threat. Katsuyori Shibata had returned to the company, and he beat Hiroki Goto, while Naito got his revenge on Yujiro, defeating him at Dominion that year. And Okada beat Makabe in the main event for the IWGP title. So Okada's the champion. Mm-hmm. Tanahashi still a top contender, but he just lost to Prince Devitt. We go into the G1 climax. This time, Tanahashi wins Block A outright. He edges out, listen to this crew, Shibata, Davey Boy Smith Jr., Prince Devitt, and Togi Makabe all had 10 points. Okada finished with 9. And then on the other side, Block B, you had a whole mess of people here at 10 points. Naito, Suzuki, Carl Anderson, Shelton Benjamin, Shinsuke Nakamura, Yuji Nagata, all with 10 points. Naito managed to get the tiebreaker out of all of that mess. Kota Ibushi, Toriano, and Yujiro had 8 points there. But there were also a couple of injuries in that one, by the way. Tenzan got hurt. Somebody else did too in that one. But this time, Tanahashi lost in the finals to Naito. And his extra point, right? I mentioned there were a whole bunch of people on 10 points. Tanahashi had 11. That extra point came because he had a 30-minute draw with Okada in the G1. So what does that leave us with? Well, that puts Naito as the G1 winner and Kazuchika Okada as the World Heavyweight Champion. Those two are now on a collision course for Wrestle Kingdom 8. Tanahashi continued his war with Prince Devitt all the way to destruction in Kobe in 2013. So we're talking, 11 years ago. They had a lumberjack death match in front of 8,000 people. And Tanahashi did win that one and finally rid himself of Devitt. However, Naito defeated Masato Tanaka from Chaos to keep his number 1 contendership and win the Never Openweight title. Naito was only the second Never Openweight champion, by the way. Tanaka had became the first champion in a tournament and hadn't lost it. That was from November until Destruction in Kobe that year, almost a full year, but he was the second Never Openweight champion. And so Tanahashi got a title shot at Okada. So the question was, who would Naito face at Wrestle Kingdom? Would it be Okada? Would it be Tanahashi? But he lost to King of Pro Wrestling, to Okada. He said afterwards, I won't challenge Okada for the IWGP title again. He didn't make a blanket thing like Cody did in AEW where he says, I'll never challenge for again. He said, I'm not going to challenge Okada for it. He got the best of me in this one. I have to find a new focus. The Intercontinental Champion was Shinsuke Nakamura. Nakamura just said, oh, you looking for something to do? And really, he called him out. So now Tanahashi turned his focus toward the Intercontinental title. So Tanahashi and Captain New Japan entered the World Tag League tournament for the second year in a row. And I'm only mentioning this because I thought it was funny. The previous year, they had lost out, didn't win a match because Captain New Japan got pinned every match. And they just went over. In this year, they almost did it again. Lost all their matches except for the very last one when they beat Prince Devitt and Fale just to keep them out of the finals, just to piss them off. That was the only match they won in 2 years, was over Fale and Devitt to keep Bullet Club out of the finals. So that whole thing of Bullet Club tripping on the banana peel, slipping on the banana peel just before the end, that mantle's been taken over by House of Torture. But that was the thing way back in 2013.
That's where it was born.
That's where it was born. And then, so where does that leave us coming out of World Tag League, which is always late in the year, right? Well, that would set up Shinsuke Nakamura versus Hiroshi Tanahashi for the Intercontinental title. And the main event of Kazuchika Okada defending the World Heavyweight title against Tetsuya Naito.
Is this the year that this all happened?
Or was that the main event? What was the main event? You had Tanahashi and Nakamura, Okada and Naito. Naito, the babyface, who'd been teaming with Tanahashi for years. Nakamura, the leader of Chaos. Okada, is he the number 1 guy in Chaos now, or is Nakamura? That was a discussion that was had back then. Geto was manager of Okada. That was unquestioned. But Nakamura was kind of the number 1 guy, but he had the number 2 belt. But he's wrestling the ace. What's the main event of Wrestle Kingdom 8? That decision would end up having ripples that are still being felt in New Japan today. That very decision, which we will talk about when we come back to all this, because that
what a hook.
Make sure you stay tuned for that one. All right, so we're coming toward the end of this stuff with Tanahashi here. Again, it's 25th anniversary of being a pro wrestler. That was very, very recently. But when we left off, we were headed toward Wrestle Kingdom number 8. And at that time, Shinsuke Nakamura was the Intercontinental Champion, and he was making that title his own. He really took that and ran with it and established it. He may have been the leader of Chaos, or was that Okada? It's hard to tell back then. They were kind of co-leaders. Okada was the world heavyweight champion, of course, but Nakamura was the charismatic king of New Japan at that time. And Nakamura, the Intercontinental Champion, was facing the ace of the entire company. Tanahashi had challenged and lost to Okada, so he just said, well, I'm not going to interrupt this reign anymore. You got me, so I will not challenge Okada for that belt as long as he's holding it. That would be a key thing. And he did say that. This was not a whole, I'll never challenge again. He just said, I'm not going to challenge Okada during this reign. He has turned me away, and on my honor, I will not challenge for him again. So that left Tanahashi with something to do, with nothing to do, rather, which was filled by Nakamura, who said, well, hey, this Intercontinental title means the world to me. Why don't you take a shot at it? I'll beat you. So, yeah, we go into Wrestle Kingdom. Tetsuya Naito has won the G1, but the fans aren't that into him. He's a babyface, but they're not really cheering him. The fans of Osaka have flat out turned on him. They've always been a little bit defiant anyway. But you have the World Heavyweight Champion facing the G1 winner. You have the most charismatic guy in the company facing the ace of the company. What exactly is the main event of Wrestle Kingdom 8? Well, they had a fan vote, and they received word from the fans that the fans knew exactly what the main event was. And the main event was Nakamura versus Tanahashi. So the World Heavyweight title, Okada versus the G1 winner, went on second to last. It was the semifinal. And the Intercontinental title match closed the show. Both those matches were excellent, by the way. And in that one, Tanahashi defeated Nakamura in the main event to win the Intercontinental title for the very first time. This fulfilled his quest there that he was going to go and get that belt he was going to win that title. This is the only one he really hadn't won. Attendance was 35,000 for this one. So in a few years of Tanahashi's 5-match Wrestle Kingdom win streak, they had effectively doubled the attendance at Wrestle Kingdom. So this was his 5th win in a row at Kingdom. Not all of them were main events, but a lot of them were. Most of them were. And Nakamura wanted to go back after that title. So he further established it by winning the New Japan Cup, and then he challenged for the Intercontinental title instead of the World Championship. So Nakamura, again, putting over that Intercontinental title, saying that's more important to me than the World title right now. I'm not going to challenge my Chaos teammate. I'm going to go after that Intercontinental belt again. And this was a period when you could really make the case that they were 1A and 1B as far as the belts in New Japan go. Now, Okada, I mentioned, retained the title against Naito at Wrestle Kingdom 8. It didn't happen right away, but this was when the decision was made that things aren't clicking with Tetsuya Naito, that he needs a little bit of a change of scenery. He needs a little change of attitude. So in the first half of that year, and it didn't happen immediately after Wrestle Kingdom, but that's when Tetsuya Naito went back to Mexico for a little bit of a run over there, where he joined up with the guy now known as Andrade and Rush and all that guys, La Sombra, and became one of the Ingobernables in CMLL. And of course, he would come back with that all new attitude instead of being, bright-eyed and getting the fans into it. And by God, we're all going to rally together and be good guys and take pictures with everybody's babies. That's when he walked down to the ring and took 20 minutes to get there, took another 20 minutes to get his gear off, didn't care what the fans think of him, basically told him to screw off and told the company to screw off. And we got the LIJ Naito. As it turns out, also, Bushi ended up going with him. That was a long-time ally of Naito as a babyface. And Bushi was the first guy to join up with Tetsuya when he came back. So that Wrestle Kingdom 8, where Tanahashi ended up being a big part of the fans turning away from Naito and saying, you're not really a main event guy, dude. Sorry. We want to see Tanahashi in the main event. We want to see Nakamura in the main event. It's part of the reason we have the Naito we have today, because they just decided, well, now is the time to put a little edge on the guy. So that happened over the course of the next few months. In the meantime, Tanahashi was defending his new Intercontinental title. So, but I mentioned that Nakamura won the New Japan Cup and challenged him for it. Well, in April, Nakamura regained that title, and Tanahashi was title-less again. In May of 2013, with Naito kind of out of the picture for the moment and all of that, there was a new Bullet Club leader, and that was AJ Styles, and he won the IWGP title from Okada. That thus ended the reign that Tanahashi swore he would not challenge for again. So that allowed Tanahashi to just say, okay, Okada's done. I can go ahead and challenge for the IWGP title again. He didn't have the Intercontinental title anymore. AJ Styles, this new heel version of him, was the IWGP champion. So he had a number one contenders match essentially with Katsuyori Shibata, and that put Tanahashi back in the driver's seat toward a major title. So the G1 that year, Okada and Nakamura went to the finals, and they had an absolute classic match, one of the best ones I've seen in New Japan, at the Seibu Dome baseball stadium to determine the champion. That's also a really cool looking building. So not only was it an amazing match, but it had a really cool atmosphere, this partially outdoor but domed stadium. And if you ever get a chance to see it, and then on the NJPW Pro Wrestling Returns show, remember the old show on Axis they used to have? Mauro Ranallo was on the call of that one. He was brilliant on that one. It was just a little bit of alchemy there. Mauro Ranallo calling this classic match between Okada and Nakamura. But Okada won the G1 there. So these two were on a collision course again. We go to King of Pro Wrestling. That's the show that we just previewed. Well, the King of Pro Wrestling that year, Tanahashi got the shot at AJ Styles before Okada did. So that was the whole point where Okada now has this contract for Wrestle Kingdom, but he has to defend it. He has to defend that contract like a belt all the way up until the Dome. Tanahashi got the number one contender shot because he beat Katsuyori Shibata. So Tanahashi got the shot before the G1 winner did. He beat AJ Styles to regain the IWGP title for the 7th time. And that's what brought Okada and Tanahashi back together at Wrestle Kingdom 9. And this was, I misspoke earlier. I said that was his 5th in a row. That was his 4th Wrestle Kingdom win in a row. Wrestle Kingdom 9 was his 5th. And that's when he defeated Okada. I know it. That's where he defeated Okada to retain his title, and that was in front of 36,000. So again, we're starting to reach kind of the limit here, but 36,000 people were at that show, and that was the one where Okada famously left the ring in tears. He had gotten wins over Tanahashi before, but he got upended at Wrestle Kingdom once again by Tanahashi, and that was Tanahashi got on the microphone and said, "Hey, you've got a long way to go before you're the ace of this company." And Okada was crying on the way out. The semifinal that night was another classic, Nakamura and Kota Ibushi in a wonderful match. Nakamura got the win in that one, and it was really great. And one is the Wrestle Kingdom 8, Wrestle Kingdom 9. Those are some of the better top-to-bottom in-ring shows you're ever going to see. It's just wonderful. For some other context, Bobby Fish and Kyle O'Reilly won the junior tag titles, and Kenny Omega beat Ryusuke Taguchi for the junior title on that card. Omega is still wrestling as a junior heavyweight, and underneath AJ Styles in the pecking order, so to speak. That title reign for Tanahashi wasn't very long, though. They wanted the happy ending at Wrestle Kingdom, but they had other plans for it after that. So Tanahashi lost it again to Styles in February at New Beginning in Osaka. So this was kind of a thing where they switched it off of Styles and put it on Tanahashi so that they could do Tanahashi Okada, the two huge names. They had Ibushi and Nakamura underneath it. Got that happy ending. Tanahashi did the whole air guitar thing on the way out, and everybody left happy. And it worked, right? 36,000 people. But after that, they had stories to tell. He lost it to Styles in February, a New Beginning. He spent a few more months feuding with Toru Yano again. Yano bounced him out of the New Japan Cup early. So after he lost to Styles in February, he goes to the March single elimination tournament, says, I'm going to win this thing, and I'm going right back after AJ Styles for that title. Well, Yano got him out very quickly, very early in the tournament. A classic Yano little, low blow, roll up type of thing. So now he's pissed at Yano again. So it's kind of funny. We mentioned this, that we don't think of them as a huge grudge rivalry, but in two different instances, Yano and Tanahashi were absolutely at each other's throats, which, leads this whole Bebop tag team thing to be a little bit more amusing when you think about how these guys went to war a few times over the years. So he feuded with Yano. They went all the way to Dominion. He got the win over Yano, Tanahashi did, and then he could move on to the G1. And also at Dominion, by the way, Okada got the IWGP title from AJ. So again, AJ had a couple of reigns with the IWGP title, but they never lasted tremendously long. Only a few months at a time. He never really made it around to Wrestle Kingdom again with the belt, that type of thing. But again, they wanted those Japanese stars in the main events of Kingdom. And can't say they were wrong. Again, they were getting some of their best crowds in years. I also want to mention that Sho and Yo were in the Young Lions match. I like to kind of contextualize that to see the guys that we think of as stars now and where they were at the time. So that was an interesting note. We move on to the G1 climax. Again, Tanahashi won the A block with 14 points. Nakamura and Okada tied with 14 points in block B. Okada went into the tournament as champion, but Nakamura won their block match. So classic New Japan booking where the champion gets an inch away, but somebody upends him. And Nakamura won the tiebreaker. So it was Tanahashi versus Nakamura for the G1 championship that year. And Tanahashi was victorious to win his second G1 climax. Okada's a champion. Tanahashi just won the G1. We're back on that same collision course again. They drew 36,000 last year, so we're ready to go right back to it. He had lost to Tetsuya Naito and Bad Luck Fale during the G1. Tanahashi did. So those were his title defense contracts as they headed back to Wrestle Kingdom there. With that in mind, he won both of those, and Okada continued to hold on to the IWGP title. So they squared off again at Wrestle Kingdom 10. This is the time when Okada was able to finally overcome Tanahashi at Wrestle Kingdom and hold on to the title, winning a classic. Again, this is when Tanahashi was still absolutely one of the best wrestlers in the world. Okada was one of the best wrestlers in the world. Nakamura was. Ibushi was healthy and can do anything. Naito was still healthy and can do anything. The main events during this period of New Japan Pro Wrestling were absolutely spectacular. And down lower on the card, you had guys like Omega in the junior heavyweight matches. And you had some great tag team stuff like Red Dragon and the like. So if you want to go back and watch some of those Wrestle Kingdoms or Dominions and things, it will amaze you what the quality of in-ring product was during this run. And Tanahashi was probably the number one guy in it. And you could say that it was Okada. But at Wrestle Kingdom 10, Okada beat him, held on to the title, and Tanahashi would never quite be at Okada's level again. This was Okada ascending to a plane just a touch higher. It's not that Tanahashi would never defeat him again, but if you look back at this, after Wrestle Kingdom 10, it was always Okada on a higher level than Tanahashi, and he might get a win in a G1 or something like that. But most of the time, it was Okada hitting the Rainmaker and beating him after this. It was a true passing of the torch moment in a way that we don't often see as cleanly as this, where Tanahashi took half a step back and was never really able to beat Okada again, although he would hold the title again. It should be noted, by the way, that Wrestle Kingdom win streak ended and attendance was down to 25,000. It dropped a little bit for that rematch. So when Okada beat him, going back to the same match as the main event didn't quite work the way they were hoping it would. Still drew 25,000. Also on that card, Katsuyori Shibata won the never openweight title from Tomohiro Ishii, and Nakamura beat AJ Styles in the semifinal. This day was more significant because it came out that Nakamura, AJ Styles, Carl Anderson, and Doc Gallows all gave their notice to New Japan that they were going to be moving to WWE within the month. Remember, by the end of the month, AJ Styles had already appeared at the Royal Rumble, and Nakamura at the very beginning of February would face Sami Zayn up in Dallas at an NXT takeover.
I went there.
You were there
that year. I went to that one.
Man, I didn't get to go to that one. It was just a few hours for me. I couldn't quite.
That was the takeover for Mania weekend, Dallas, WrestleMania 32.
Yeah. It was the. Excuse me. He didn't debut for NXT until then. He joined WWE in February. It was the
teaser
end of
started at March. He joined in February. He debuted because he did press photos with Triple H at the time. Like there were photos taken when he joined.
USVA guy says numbers were padded for Wrestle Kingdom 8 and 9. I'm just kind of going with what was reported there. The Observer had it as about that much. So we'll see. We'll see. But I'm not saying wrestling companies don't pad attendance. Good luck.
We heard 78,000, 93,000.
Who would ever 93,000? 93,000 was a joke then. Yeah, anyway, at this stage, Nakamura is gone. Tanahashi has now put Okada over. You think about what this is like for Okada. So he went from being kind of the co-leader of Chaos and the guy who was fighting tooth and nail with Tanahashi. All of a sudden, they do this passing of the torch thing, which was designed to be in the first place. We're going to go with Okada as the number one guy. Well, not only does that happen, but the same night that happens, Nakamura gives his notice. Like, he doesn't have a rival anymore as far as being the number one dude in the company. They're all gone now. So we're going to have to build some new guys up for Okada right here. And he became the true ace of the company going forward, even though the nickname stayed with Tanahashi. Tanahashi would be back, though. And we will look at his career after this passing of the torch in a future episode, because remember, he still has a G1 and another IWGP title run left in him. But after Wrestle Kingdom 10, there could be absolutely no doubt who the number one guy in the company was. It was Kazuchika Okada. And Tanahashi and his rivalry with Okada was a huge part of why. And I'm not saying that Tanahashi solely made Kazuchika Okada, because Okada had great matches against everybody, but it was probably his career-defining rivalry. I mean, I think when Okada retires, whenever that is, and hopefully it's not for a long time, I think people will look back and just say Okada Tanahashi. That every single time they wrestled each other, it was an important event. And that was how Tanahashi pretty much made Okada into the ace. And then the decks were clear for him when two other guys who had held the IWGP title bolted for Connecticut.
There you go. So we have Hiroshi Tanahashi's history we've been going over for weeks now, and we're going to wrap it up here today. And when we last left off, he was in the main event of Wrestle Kingdom. It was Wrestle Kingdom 9, and he had put over Kazuchika Okada on what turned out to be a historic, pivotal day for New Japan for a lot of reasons. First of all, it was one of the better cards we've seen. Wrestle Kingdom 9 is phenomenal. You should go back and watch it. It was the one that had you had AJ Styles and Nakamura underneath. You had the Okada Tanahashi match when Tanahashi could still have those 5-star classics. And it was the beginning of the end of AJ, Anderson and Gallows, Nakamura, all those guys in New Japan. They have given their notice that they were going to be leaving and heading to WWE. So he had put over Okada, and then he was sort of a half a step below Okada in the pecking order for the most part. Okada had officially kind of taken over that absolute top spot. Now, Tanahashi was still one of the biggest stars in the company. That was without question. And to give you an idea, now that he was no longer the world heavyweight champion, Okada had been anointed, and with Nakamura's departure, who was Intercontinental champion at the time, that was an Intercontinental title defense against AJ Styles, they had to set up a match at New Beginning to create a new Intercontinental champion, and they immediately chose Tanahashi to be in it. His opponent for that was the person who ousted AJ Styles from the Bullet Club, is in the storyline in order to get us to that point, Kenny Omega. So Kenny Omega had taken over Bullet Club, and Tanahashi, of course, the perfect foil for Bullet Club, the classic babyface company guy, right? Who's more New Japan than Hiroshi Tanahashi? Certainly more than Nakamura, who had that kind of a flamboyant streak. Okada, who was, the cocky guy. Tanahashi was the classic. I'll show up at the corporate events and shake all the hands and kiss all the babies. So he was a great foil for all the heels in New Japan, and a guy that could really both put them over and beat them without there being a ton of title switches. So there's a good way that once the title was on Okada, for him to feud with these top guys from the heel factions. And he lost that match to Kenny Omega. So that made Kenny Omega the Intercontinental Champion. And he spent most of that year as a foil to those top heels. This is when Naito, by the way, was at his most disrespectful. Naito eventually ended up taking the Intercontinental title. That would be a while down the road. And that was when he would take the belt and throw it up in the air and let it crash to the ground. He would take the plates and bend them. Just complete, utter contempt for the company was his character, and disrespect for any of the title belts. Tanahashi wasn't a big Intercontinental Champion guy. He was more like a world title guy for a while. Like he feuded with Nakamura over it, so he had some history with it. But seeing Naito disrespect his belt was a bridge too far for Hiroshi Tanahashi. He got very upset about that. So he spent most of that year clashing with Omega on the Bullet Club side and the heel Naito on the LIJ side. And like I said, good conscience. Now, he teamed with Yoshitatsu and Mike Elgin to defeat the Elite for the never openweight six-man tag team titles, then lost them right back. That was another trope of Tanahashi at the time. He would win the never openweight six-man belts with various partners and then drop them fairly quickly. You know, those titles bounced around a lot anyway. So once it was with the Elite, then there's the other theme of the year, by the way. Tanahashi's body begins to betray him. He hurt his shoulder, and he had to pull out of what would have been, what ended up being, New Japan's first ladder match. He had to be replaced in that match. That had been set up with Kenny Omega. It was supposed to be Tanahashi versus Omega in that one, but Mike Elgin ended up taking his place and winning the Intercontinental title with that one. And then, so he went through that, like I said, bouncing around with the six-man titles. And at Wrestle Kingdom, he challenged Naito for the Intercontinental title, but he lost that one. So the next night at Dash, he, Taguchi, and Manabu Nakanishi defeated Bushi, Evil, and Sanada to get the never openweight titles back. He lost them again not too long later. So he was just kind of doing switcheroos right there. Ricochet was subbed in for Nakanishi for another run with those titles, beating the LIJ. And then that set Tanahashi on a course to challenge Tetsuya Naito again. I mentioned that Naito was disrespecting the Intercontinental Championship. Now this is also when Tanahashi ruptured his biceps tendon, and he decided not to have surgery on it. And he would come to regret that decision. He later said he wished he would take the time off, but he didn't want to take that much time away and just kind of wrapped it up, similar to what Sanada ended up doing when he tore his bicep. The issue with doing that is it's never quite the same again, and so it makes for a difficult situation. He went to Dominion against Naito and defeated Naito to get that Intercontinental title back at a great show, by the way. That was one of the great Dominions at the time. The work rate in New Japan at this point was just brilliant. It was headlined by Okada and Omega's 1 hour draw for the IWGP title. That was the big match there. Naito it was either a ref stoppage or a tap out to the Boston Crab, or the Scorpion Deathlock, or the Sharpshooter, whatever you want to call him. More of a Sharpshooter guy because I'm a Bret Hart mark. But either way, that move right there. And interesting one, Cody defeated Michael Elgin on the undercard there. And the Guerrillas of Destiny, who are now in WWE, defeated War Machine for the World Tag Team titles on that show. So some names that we're seeing in a lot of other places and other companies now were on that one. But that was a great Dominion. The Young Lion match on that show, Jeremy, you ready for this one? David Finlay, Shota Umino, and Tomoyuki Oka, so Great Okan, defeated Hirai Kawato, Katsuya Kitamura, and Tetsuhiro Yagi. And Tetsuhiro Yagi is a name that I hadn't thought of in a long time. Of course, we know Hirai Kawato ended up being Kawato-san in CMLL, and then he became Master Wato back here and is just returning to the ring after injury. Kitamura looked like a can't-miss star, just $1 million body, all kinds of intensity, but he ended up getting hurt and then ended up leaving the company and ended up passing away only a couple of years after his run in New Japan. And Tetsuhiro Yagi broke his leg, that was his ulna. He broke his ulna, that was his arm, and never just left the dojo, never came back. Just for whatever reason, these guys, that was it for him. So he spent the rest of the year, Tanahashi did, defending that Intercontinental title. And for the second consecutive year, he missed the G1 finals due to a loss or a draw on the final day. So again, a guy that's just, we're establishing Okada as the overall god here. And Tanahashi is getting very, very close in the G1. But there's always something that goes wrong. He would have a 30-minute draw with Okada that kept him out of one finals. It kept both of them out of the finals there. It was the one thing they couldn't do was draw, and they did, right? And then the next year he lost to Naito, so that Naito could go into the finals, that type of thing. So we get to the precipice, not again, just kind of putting over that next generation of guys. It's funny to think of Naito as the next generation of anything now that we've been talking about him as probably finishing up his time on top, similar to what Tanahashi is about to do. But at that point, Naito, the LIJ Naito, that heel Naito, disrespectful Naito, needed that foil to put him over, and that's what Tanahashi was helping to do. He ended up going to the Dome. Now, at Power Struggle that year, he was attacked by Jay White, who was returning from excursion. So that was when we first got a look at the Switchblade. And he challenged Tanahashi for the Dome. Tanahashi got hurt again on the way to the Dome, managed to get into the ring for the actual match, and defeated White. They treated Jay White just like we have Yota Tsuji, just like they did Uemura, just like they did Ryohei Oiwa. His first big match, he lost to a top guy. He lost to Tanahashi. And then they sent Jay off on his trajectory of ingratiating himself into chaos so that he and Geto could do the big turn on.
And off he goes.
Off he goes. And that was so after Wrestle Kingdom, he defeated Jay White, but then he lost that title, the Intercontinental title, to Minoru Suzuki at New Japan. Meanwhile, Okada was just piling up his title defenses, and he was coming close to Tanahashi's record of 12 successful defenses. If you remember from a few weeks ago, when Tanahashi got close to that record, Yuji Nagata came out and challenged him because Nagata held the record and said, I want to try to keep my name in the record books. I want to challenge you and do it myself. And so history repeats itself. This time, Tanahashi comes out to Okada and just says, you're getting awfully close to my record. How about you have to go through me for it? So that was the storyline, that Okada would now have to once again take on his greatest challenger. And but just like before, he lost that challenge, and Okada became the new record holder. June 9th of 2018, though, not long after that, in fact, the next one, Kenny Omega defeated Okada in the famous 1 hour and 4 minute 2 out of 3 falls match. That was that trilogy, Jeremy. You remember that 47-minute match at the Dome, the 1 hour draw. A year later at Dominion, they do the 1 hour 4 minute match. That ended the record-breaking reign and put Kenny Omega on top. But Tanahashi, of course, was the classic Bullet Club foil. At the G1 that year, he had that one last gasp. He won the A block going away. He scored 15 points in his matches. So he only had a draw and a loss in the whole thing. So out of a possible 18 points, Tanahashi scored 15. So they were really putting him over big. On the other side, Kota Ibushi won with the B block with tiebreakers on 12 points. So it was Kota Ibushi against Hiroshi Tanahashi. He defeated Ibushi to win his third G1 in a 35-minute classic. Again, his body is starting to betray him, but not his knees so much, and he still had phenomenal matches. So he was still doing very, very good stuff in 2018.
This was the run that put him in a position where his body started to really let him down.
That's very true, because now he's doing all these long matches and at an advanced age. Tanahashi then defeated Ibushi, and he had to defend that contract for the rest of the year against Jay White and Kazuchika Okada. That avenged his only 2 non-victories in the G1. He went through them he got past Jay White at Destruction, and then he beat Okada at King of Pro Wrestling, respectively, which brought him into Wrestle Kingdom 13's main event against Kenny Omega. At that Wrestle Kingdom, he became the first 8-time IWGP Heavyweight Champion. Also, interestingly enough, the first to officially take the IWGP right to challenge all the way to the Dome and win it. No one had actually done that yet. At first, it wasn't an official contract, right? It wasn't an official contract. Right. Then it became the official thing, almost like the New Japan's version of the briefcase. And it became something you had to defend on the way there. Right. No one had ever taken it all the way home. So there you go. Dunston
saw it through.
Dunston says, I give credit for them not running Okada versus Tana for another 2 years from 2016 to 2018. It had to be hard to hold off. But they did. And Dunston also said 2018 is probably the last time you had Tana go 3rd and 4th gear consistently. Yeah, that's exactly right. And so that was the feel-good story that was not to be missed. He did go all the way there, but it was not meant to last. He lost to Jay White at New Beginning in Osaka. So his reign, I don't even think got to 40 days. I think it was 39 right there before he lost to Jay White. And that was the last time Tanahashi was truly on top. He would win the never openweight title and also the U.S. title, so he's a Grand Slam champion. You know, he held all of the belts. He hasn't gotten the global one yet, has he?
No,
Maybe.
no. I did consider Tanahashi to be a transitional champion when he beat Omega, and they put the title immediately on the White, because it just meant to me like Omega was going to have the title the whole time, but they put White in that position instead.
Yeah.
And it was just a hop and skip.
Yes, and it was to get that feel-good moment. So you got that one last run, right? The G1 run where he just does better than anyone thinks he's going to do, and then he goes all the way to Wrestle Kingdom, and they have the happy ending at Wrestle Kingdom, and then after that, it's, well, now it's time to make this new guy.
It was the blueprint for the Naito run that we got last year.
Mm-hmm. And, of course, he also won the six-man titles a bunch more times, and he and Okada teamed for a while. That was the hell freezing over moment where he and Okada actually teamed up. And if you remember, they didn't win much at first at all. It was like this weird story that they could not actually win a match together. Mm-hmm. But then they would become a dominant trios team with Ishii. But the fact is, his time on top was indeed effectively over with. As injuries piled up, his body began to show the wear and tear that being the ace for so long brought him. So always a star, but that was the end of Hiroshi Tanahashi as the top guy, the champion in New Japan. And now, of course, after a couple of years of even doing a thing where Kota Ibushi looked like he was going to turn on him because he just wasn't what he used to be. And then, Kota Ibushi ended up staying on the side of the Angels. But
the best way to put it is they will always call Tanahashi the ace, but he was no longer the ace.
But even his decline was part of a major storyline here too. So he's always mattered. He always will matter. But those days on top are over with. And now, of course, at King of Pro Wrestling, he makes the announcement that he is on his retirement tour. And in the same year, John Cena and Hiroshi Tanahashi, who in many ways
within weeks of each other.
In many ways, kind of parallel each other. They're just like the most classic babyface you can get of these eras. Cena managed to do it in an era where classic babyfaces don't get over that much. In Japan, they do, but it's just an interesting comparison between the two of them. Sort of parallel careers.
Tanahashi, Naito, Danielson, a lot of these guys, man, their days are numbered. They're all like, appreciate them while you got them. That Naito match from King of Pro Wrestling, that's the last one of those we're gonna get. Like an IWGP title defense by Naito. That was it. You saw it.
I'm also going to say this right here now on October 24th, 2024, and that is that they will have all this, and there will be a big ceremony, and there will be a big retirement match at Wrestle Kingdom in what is 2026, right? It's going to be the final one. There is no way in hell that's Hiroshi Tanahashi's final match. Just like what we just saw, no way in hell that's Bryan Danielson's final match.
Right.
Everybody not named Jack Briscoe comes back. If they are physically allowed to come back, everybody comes back. Those two will as well. But we'll be able to say goodbye.
I will throw this out there before we wrap it up for tonight.
Yeah.
There's one who won't do that, but that's Naito.
You think Naito's actually going to walk?
When Naito's done, he's done. I can see it. I can see it in his eyes. Like, he is, even that match at King of Pro Wrestling, like, when it was emotional. Like, he's made up his mind that when it's time to walk away, I have no doubt that dude will show up and do like stuff for appearances. But when he's done, I think he's done.